Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 2025 Town of Barrington Deliberative Session. I hope you enjoy our nice intimate venue that we're in this year. We figured it would be a small crowd, and in the gym it might look a little sparser than it does in here, but glad you're all here. I like to begin these meetings with a little bit of Barrington history. This time it's recent history as we consider the contributions of a couple of citizens who passed away last summer. Both of these folks gave a lot of their time and energy for the good of our town and the school system. Charter Weeks was thoughtful and vocal about what he believed would benefit Barrington. I'd like to invite someone who collaborated with Charter to tell us a little about him. Please welcome Mike Clark.
Whoa. Wow. Thank you. Good morning. When they asked me to come up and perhaps share a few stories about Charter Weeks, I quickly accepted, and then I thought about it a little while, and I realized that telling stories about Charter Weeks was going to take time. His stories were like Charter. They were deep and involved, and you had to explain a lot of background. And he said I only had 5 minutes to do this. And then I thought the other thing is a lot of the stories that I shared with Charter may not be politically correct for this venue. Wow. I just said politically correct and Charter Weeks in the same sentence. Can you imagine? Well, first of all, I'd like to give out a little shout out to a friend of mine down in Asheville, North Carolina, who I'm sure is watching this or going to watch it and sitting on the edge of her chair and wondering just exactly what I'm going to say or not say. But the first thing I'd like to point out is today, we would not be in this building on this site if it hadn't been for Charter Weeks to personally take the initiative and go see Dwight Haley and convince Dwight that this would make a much better place for Barrington to build a school than a housing development. And that was Charter on his own doing that. When I first moved to Barrington over 45 years ago, been here a couple weeks and at work and having a cup of coffee, and one of the guys says, well, how you doing? You settled in, got used to it? What do you think of New Hampshire? And I said, well, I have to tell you, it's a little bit of a culture shock for me from coming from the Midwest. I got an awful lot to learn. And he looked up and he smiled and he says, well, he said, wait till you go to the town meeting. I said, a what? He said, the town meeting. You do that, then you come back and talk to me. So I went home and told George, I said, I guess we're going to the town meeting. Not sure. So we did. Went to the underneath the old gym that used to be the place where the kids played ball, and the selectmen, and then the library, and then everything else that we've reused in this town. We went in and signed up, name, serial number, blood type, and all that, and they handed me a little piece of paper, and I thought, wonder what the hell that's for. I can't take much notes on that. I stuck it in my pocket, and we went and sat down, and the mucky mucks up here were trying to start the meeting and explain everything. This guy kept popping out of the crowd. He kept coming up, asking things, asking questions, and clarifying a point, moving a motion, something about a point of order, and calling for a vote. All very foreign terms to me. And every time he did it, he would announce, Charter Weeks, Scruton Pond. And after about the fourth or fifth time, I said, Charter Weeks, Scruton Pond. I said, I think they know who you are by now, Mr. Weeks. And besides that full-length fur coat that you're wearing? How many remember that one? I think they not only know who you are, I don't think they'll ever forget you. And I thought to myself, is this guy just that smart? Is he inquisitive, fact-finding, antagonistic, just trying to provoke a discussion? Or what the hell is it with him? And we all know by now that Charter was all those things and more. And I soon realized that I had to get to know this guy. And we soon became very fast friends and shared an awful lot of episodes, a lot of things that we were able to work together in this town. But again, the stories that I'll try to hit some highlights, and hopefully I can trigger some of your thoughts and some of your times that you've got to interact, and because Charter did touch us all. The first bit of irony was I remember the bicentennial parade and Charter Weeks dressed up as Uncle Sam, passing out United States Army balloons. Think about that. And then the night he told me about the passing of his father, Silas. He told me about having to turn the heat down in the back room and the cardboard box that cost him $60 that he's still mad about, and that long ride to Portland in the station wagon. And the Sunday night, he called me about 10 o'clock and he said, "You need to get over here." I said, we got a job to do. And I said, "At 10 o'clock Sunday night?" He said, "Yes." And I got over there, handed me in George a stack of 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper and a magic marker, and we sat and wrote thank you notes. He wanted to write thank you notes to the men and women, the hardworking people that built this building, and think they deserved a personal thank you. I said, "What are we going to do with them?" He said, "Well, get in the car." Here we are, 11 o'clock, climbing over the, do not mud. The walls were up, the ceiling was up. That was about it. It was raining. It was an awful night. I said, "Charter, you really think we should be doing this? You think we might get arrested for trespassing or something like that?" He said, "For hanging thank you notes?" I said, "All right, I'm right behind you." And then one time the school board, the superintendent came in and explained to us that the federal government had sent us a letter that was going to require Barrington to change their curriculum. And not that we were against the changes, but it was going to cost Barrington some money. It wasn't in the budget. And of course, Charter didn't like that. Charter said, "That's what you call an unfunded mandate." Charter knew all those kinds of terms. And so he tried everything he could, we all did, to try to figure out how do we wiggle our way out of it, and didn't. And as I recall, the final shot was Charter said, "Well, we'll send a bill to the government." I said, "We'll send an invoice to the federal government." He said, "Yeah." So we did. And I think the last time I checked with Vicki, I don't think that invoice was ever paid. But we did get mentioned in USA Today. That was kind of the highlight of the whole issue. But the most amazing conversation I ever had with Charter Weeks was summer evening sitting on his deck looking at his garden and possibly having a toddy. All right, we were having a toddy. And I was feeling kind of down. I had just lost a very good friend of mine and just way too young. I was feeling bad, and I was pouring my heart out to Charter, and I finally looked over, and Charter's smiling from ear to ear. And I said, "What?" Charter says, "Well, let me tell you." He says, "If I left you today, I'd be very content. I've had a good life. I've worked hard. I've helped as many people as I think I could. I would never look back and have any regrets." And that touched me. I have never since or before ever run into any person that was at more peace with their own soul than Charter Weeks. I was touched. Of course, Charter had to go on then and explain in detail the event as he pictured it out tilling in the garden. And when the fateful event happened, his hopes was that the old tiller would just turn around and come back and make one more pass. That was Charter. So after him and Marie decided that it was time and they had to make the move, and they picked Asheville, and I tried to keep up with Charter and called him regularly, and I finally asked him, I said, how you doing? Find a place to live? Feel comfortable there? He said, we are so lucky. We are so fortunate. We found this beautiful little condo. He says, I don't have to do anything. It's just going to work great for us. It's just a lovely place. And it's just a real short walk to the fitness center. It is on the golf course. Did I tell you it was on the golf course? To the fitness center and the swimming pool, of course, and the country club. I said, Charter, do you hear yourself? The guy I remember from the tree house on Scruton Pond, and you're living in a condo on the golf course with a swimming pool and That's when the classic Charter Weeks laugh started, and it was a classic. I told him that night, I said, I have one more promise for you, Charter. Somehow, I don't know how or when, but I'm going to get the opportunity to address the next town meeting, and I'm going to share with all of our friends that you're living in a condo on the golf course. And the laugh ensued. So, Charter Weeks, on behalf of all of Barrington and past and the future, and thank you so much for your hard work and your dedication and your love for our town. Thank you for your service, Charter. We miss you, buddy.
Thanks, Mike. And Mike is one of those people that's put in the time, too, and serving in various positions for the town. So we appreciate it. Stan Swire, who preceded me as town moderator, held that position for a remarkable 33 years, from 1985 to 2018. For the first 13 or 14 years of his tenure, Barrington held traditional town meetings. Under that system, we would meet usually in the evening to debate and vote on the warrant articles in sometimes contentious sessions that lasted well into the night or the next morning. Stan managed these proceedings gracefully, keeping the peace and getting the work done. There's one tradition that I think embodies the nature of those meetings. At least once during each session, a booming voice would call out, "Mr. Moderator." Stan would reply, "I recognize Harlan Califf." And we all knew that we would soon be educated about some issue that Harlan felt strongly about. I don't remember what topics were discussed, but I recall very clearly the sounds and sometimes theatrical interactions that represented the workings of democratic town government. Those were fun. While watching Stan do this job for more than 3 decades, I thought it might be something I'd like to try if the opportunity arose. When he decided to retire in 2018, he asked if I'd be willing to run for the office. Apparently, I said yes. Despite the 600 to 700 pages of written guidance, everyone who does this job has to find their own way of doing it. And all 200 plus moderators in New Hampshire have had to figure that out. I was fortunate to follow Stan Swire, who did the job with dignity and built the trust in our elections that Barrington citizens exhibit whenever we vote. Stan and Charter were good friends, good citizens, and good examples for folks who might be interested in doing something for their community. And I know they both would say, just get on with it. So we will. I'd like to introduce folks who are up front here and some that are out in the audience. And if you came in and haven't checked in with the supervisors up there, that's where you get your voting card, which allows you to vote if we need to vote on anything. Okay, I'm Ron St. Jean, Town Moderator. Up here we have Kim Karakas, Town Clerk, Rebecca Smith, Deputy Town Clerk. On the Select Board, Jim Sakosha, the Chair, Rob Gibson, Vice Chair, Joyce Capiello, Tracy Kardikoff, and Danon Manschreck. We have Town Administrator Connor McIver, Office Administrator Tiffany Cottle, who's hiding behind the black curtain back here. We have some advisory budget committee people in the audience, I think. Peter Royce, you out here somewhere? Yeah, I don't see anybody, but I do. In the back, oh, way in the back. Okay. All right, Bill Irving, Scott Shepard, Dana Manschreck again, Mona LaPierre, and I hope I get this name sort of right, Farida Sagasi. All right. I was close. The supervisors of the checklist who you checked in with back there, Suzanne McNeil, Norm Tremblay. Good to see them. And our AV stuff today is courtesy of Mike Geyer with Audio Events. Okay, Select Board Chair Jim Sakosha has some opening remarks.
On behalf of the entire Select Board, I would like to welcome you all and thank everyone for being here today. Before we begin, if you would please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Barrington is a desirable community for many reasons. As growth in the greater Seacoast area continues, the Select Board has focused much time and energy on preserving Barrington's character and planning for Barrington's future. In 2024, this elected board hit the ground running with plan and actions to execute on town goals. When I say town goals, I'm referring to goals that were crafted through community support, including so many strategic sessions, committee meetings, surveys, in person or online, and or just talking with your neighbor. Countless hours to say the least. There has been great progress in many areas, which I'll soon list. But before that, the board and I first would like to thank Rick Walker for his 40 years of service and 25 years as fire chief. We thank you. We wish you the happiest retirement and looking forward to still seeing you at a volunteer role in town. So we really do appreciate you. So in the areas that I'll list is preserving character. That means securing the 13-acre Barrington Common property, hundreds of acres added into permanent conservation, zoning changes, including a comprehensive update to the town's conservation subdivision rules to better preserve Barrington's character, updating the master plan, and securing a $100,000 grant for plan implementation and focus on attracting commercial and industrial tax base, and those are currently ongoing negotiations. Planning, multiple strategic planning and goal setting processes, capital improvement programs and funding plan policy updates, master plan steering committees and succession management. Infrastructure. Construction is underway at the new library approved by voters. Construction will begin soon at the community center with a $1 million grant to replace the engineering for many critical transportation projects, a $600,000 grant to replace the culvert communication upgrades, new vehicle equipment, pavement management plan implementation, and dams, including bridges and culverts. Physical responsibility. In addition to the 2.99 municipal tax rate, we have secured more than $2 million in grants for the third year in a row and had another clean financial audit. So hats off to everybody who had a part in that. Collaboration, formation of a collaborative and communicative joint committee with the school, inclusion of the school district warrant articles in the voter guide, coordination with the state on regional infrastructure projects, and the antique truck show. Today, the select board is glad to present a warrant with the board support, with the support from the select board and advisory budget committee. This is support, not a rubber stamp, but reflective of dozens of meetings and negotiations to settle on proposals which can be unanimously supported. Printed copies of the voter guide, which are white, salmon, and gold, and the budget, green and blue, can be found at the registration table, and all warrant and budget details are available online at barringtonnh.gov/2025 warrant. The 2025 budget process started last summer with department heads and the town administrator developing a proposal. Beginning in October, the Advisory Budget Committee reviewed, discussed, and deliberated each line item of the budget. Budget developed was challenging, and the initial budget proposal was cut by 38% through negotiations and compromise. Additionally, 40% of the 2025 budget increase is related to the new library. I would like to thank all involved in their work and dedication through the budget process. In addition to the operating budget, we are also supporting many annual contributions to the capital reserve accounts to responsibly plan for the future capital expenditures and sidebar agreements for the police. Thank you again. We look forward to your questions and discussions this morning. On Tuesday, March 11th, 2025, all articles will be voted on at the Barrington Middle School right here from 8 a.m. through 7 p.m. Please spread the word, and let's break the 24 record of 41% voter turnout. Finally, I would like to thank the many volunteers and employees for all their great service to make this town awesome. Appreciate you all.
Thanks, Jim. I'll go over the guidelines for an orderly meeting. Number one, the moderator follows no set rules of order. Voters have the right to challenge the moderator's rules and rulings. Number two, only registered voters, town employees, and the town's attorney will be allowed to speak. The attorney's not here, so you don't have to worry about that. And number three, after an article is introduced, the Select Board and Advisory Budget Committee will be recognized first before any comments from the floor. Number four, the moderator may limit debate. Number five, all debate and questions will be through the moderator. That means if you're speaking, you don't address somebody in the audience. Number six, speakers must be recognized by the moderator before speaking. Speakers must identify themselves and speak into the microphone. We have one mic down here in the front and one in the back up in the corner, so people in the balcony don't have to come down front. Number seven, complicated motions should be submitted in writing. Number eight, amendments must be moved and seconded before discussion, and those making the motion and second must identify themselves. Number nine, only one amendment will be considered at a time. Number 10, to request a secret ballot. 5 or more voters in attendance must make the request in writing before a hand vote is called for. Immediately following a hand vote, 7 voters may request a vote by secret ballot. Number 11, this is often a favorite. Voters may move to restrict reconsideration of an article after discussion of that article is complete. If the motion passes, there can be no further discussion of that article. And my favorite RSA 40:7, which says, everyone shall be silent at the desire of the moderator on pain of forfeiting $1 for each offense for the use of the town. I don't think we've used that one yet, but could happen. All right, Article 1 is the election of officers. We can't do that today. We do that at the election, but we have, for Select Board, we have 2 positions open for a 3-year term. We have 3 candidates, Joyce Capiello, Robert Russell, and Alexandra Samako. Of the trustee of the trust funds, we have an opening, one for a 3-year term. We have one candidate, Sally Varney. For cemetery trustees, there's one opening for a 3-year term. We have one candidate, Brian Lindsay. And for library trustees, we have 2 candidates for a 3-year term. Richard Campagnon, I hope I have that somewhere near right, and Diane Madariaga. Okay, let's see. Articles 2 to 14 are zoning articles. We can't modify those. So traditionally, we consider those after we've talked about all the money articles. So if someone is willing to make that motion, we would ask that we move them to following Article 28. Would anyone be willing to move that? Tracy Hardikoff. And do we have a second? Hey, Bill Irving, right? All right. All those in favor, raise your cards. All those opposed? Okay, we'll do that. So we'll go right to Article 15, the operating budget. To see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate as an operating budget, not including appropriations by special warrant articles and other appropriations voted separately, the amounts set forth on the budget posted with the warrant or as amended by vote of the first session for the purposes set forth therein, totaling $9,827,143. Should this article be defeated, the default budget shall be $9,532,097, which is the same as last year with certain adjustments required by previous action of the town or by law, or the governing body may hold one special meeting in accordance with RSA 40:13, Roman numeral 10 and 16, to take up the issue of a revised operating budget only. This article is projected to add 13.7 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $58 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. The article is recommended for approval by the ABC 4-1 and by the Select Board 5-0. And Town Administrator Connor McIver will speak about this article.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Before I get into the operating budget, I'd like to just go over some of the materials that you have to make sure everybody's familiar with the resources. This may be less important for the folks in the room, but I encourage you to share the availability of these resources to your friends and neighbors or anybody else that's a registered voter in Barrington. You heard from the chair that we had a record-setting 41% voter turnout last March. That isn't just a record in Barrington, that's a record in the state for a local election with an SB2 form of government like Barrington. And so it's important that the town government and the school government provide resources to the community so they can make informed decisions, so they don't feel intimidated by showing up to vote when there's over 30 articles to vote on. We need to make sure everybody has the information they need to make an informed decision. You all chose to participate in this process, hopefully to learn more and ask questions, and we're excited for that part of the process. But there are over 7,200 registered voters in Barrington, and it's important that we get this information out to everybody that isn't in the room today also, so they can feel empowered to show up and vote in March. So the first document is the Community Voter Guide. This document is a large source of pride for staff and the Select Board. There have been a few improvements this year. This year, again, includes the town ballot and the zoning ballot. The document is color-coded. The salmon-colored pages are the zoning ballot. That matches the color of the ballot when you show up to vote on March 11th. And this year, for the first time, we have the school warrant articles. We're very appreciative of the cooperation with the school district and the school board to include this information. The average registered voter shows up and they vote not knowing that the town and school governments are different. They don't really care. They're showing up to vote. And so we have a duty to provide everybody access to this information. Also new this year, the last page of the printed voter guide and available as a separate document is a ballot reference sheet. So we know there are over 30 articles and it's difficult to remember how you're going to vote on all those articles when you show up on March 11th, and you don't really want to be in there for 20 minutes with the curtain closed behind you. So the idea is that you can use this reference sheet, research the articles, indicate how you plan to vote, and bring this sheet with you and only this sheet with you when you go to vote so you can go through the ballot. So these are are available as individual documents up there, also available online, and would encourage folks to use those. The zoning amendments, the warrant articles, are just summaries of what is to change. It's very important that folks know what those details are. So this document provides all of those details of the specific changes with red line and red bold text, with a zoning map at the end, a large zoning map, so that you can understand the 13 zoning amendments you'll be asked to vote on. A few other documents, you have your warrant, the budget, and the default budget. These are all on the Department of Revenue Administration standardized forms. This is the best way to kind of compare community to community because it's reported in the same format. Finally, we're very proud to have all of this information and much, much more available on the town's website. The voter guide is available at barrington.nh.gov/2025 voter guide. The entire budget binder, which is over 300 pages, the document that the Advisory Budget Committee and the Select Board used to develop that $9.8 million budget, is available online at barrington.nh.gov/2025 budget. This entire slide deck, if you see something that you want to refer back to in the future, is available at barrington.nh.gov/2025 deliberative presentation. And as always, if you have any questions about anything to do with the town, a simple email to ask@barrington.nh.gov and we'll get you an answer. Okay. Now into the operating budget. Certainly this year, the meat of the warrant that folks will be voting on is the operating budget. We don't have any bonds. We don't have any other big projects. And so the operating budget is certainly the most significant article. First, I want to thank department heads, the Advisory Budget Committee, and the Select Board for the very deliberative process that we went through to develop not only this operating budget, but also the entire warrant. At its core, the town is a customer services organization, right? We provide services to the community. So I'd like to start and just briefly go over what kind of services and the volume of services we provide to the community. The assessing department assigns values to over 5,300 parcels. The building department processed over 1,000 permits last year. The finance department, as you heard from the chair, processed another $2 million in grants in 2024. Fire department, EMS, responded to 1,200 calls. Highway department maintains 80 miles of road. And let's round of applause for the highway department. It's days like today when people can be proud to live in Barrington and have the level of service and the road maintenance that we experience and have grown accustomed to. And you don't have to drive very far and very far outside of Barrington to really appreciate the work of our highway department. The land use department processed 70 applications last year. The library borrowed 71,000 items. The police department responded to 21,000 calls. Recreation department has been growing exponentially in recent years. They have over 40 programs and have touched over 9,700 participants in the last year. The tax department issues bills and collects revenues for $32 million. Remember, the town bills and pays the county and the school for the property taxes in town. The town clerk registered 13,500 vehicles and over 2,300 dogs. The transfer station processed over 15,000 tons of trash and over 500 tons of recycling. And so when we talk about this budget and what we do, these are the services that we provide across not just the core services, police, fire, and highway, but across the entire town. And it's important to keep in mind, in 2024, the town did that with a tax rate of $2.99, which represents 17% of your total tax rate. So the operating budget at a high level, as you heard from the moderator, $9,827,143. That's up about $800,000. And percentage-wise, over 2024, that's 8.82%, which is staggering. And so we'll talk about the details and how we got to there. Importantly, 40% of that increase is the library bond repayment and new operating costs for the new library, right? So this is a decision voters made in 2024, and in 2025, we had to start the budget process building around those built-in costs. So that's a 3.5% increase before we even added anything else into the budget. Of the other portions of the increase, 51% relate to wages and benefits. About 60% of the town's budget is wages and benefits. So this is actually even a little bit lower than proportional to where the budget sits now, and 9% is other categories, which we'll go over. Very important that we also pay attention to our non-property tax revenue, which is just under $4.5 million, or 46% of the budget. The default budget is a little over $9.5 million. Importantly, the budget is recommended by the ABC and the Select Board, and as we discussed, the entire budget binder is available online. So this is just a brief bar chart to show how the process progressed. You heard from the chair that this is a deliberative process with compromise and negotiations, and so the initial budget proposal from department heads was over $10.3 million. Between myself and the finance administrator and working with department heads, we brought that budget proposal down to a little over $9.9 million. And then through the advisory budget committee and the work with the select board, the final budget proposal that residents are seeing today is a little over $9.8 million. And so that reduction in some ways was separating out the wants and the needs of a growing community, right? Focusing on maintaining the level of service that we have and focusing those resources in the most productive ways. And so there was a proposal to add a land use position for conservation, which would have been 80% funded from the conservation fund. That was one of the items that was taken out. There were some reductions from the library budget as a result of negotiations with the advisory budget committee in separating out what related to the project, the library construction project, and what was an operating budget expense. And so we're going to focus on that $9.8 million today because that's what everybody will vote on March 11th. But it's important to know that there was a tremendous amount, dozens of meetings between where we started and where we are today. So this pie chart shows you that $800,000. And as we discussed, 51% wages and benefits, 40% new library costs, and 9% other categories. So if we look at that 51%, so there's two portions of the wages and benefits. There's a small portion which is additional level of service, and then there's a much larger portion which represents maintaining the existing level of service. So in terms of the addition, what is in this 51%, which was not included in the 2024 operating budget. The Select Board approved adding a new police officer in 2025 as being proposed in this budget. That's reflective of the increased call volume and the demand on the police department. There's a great presentation linked in the online materials where the police chief presented various data analyses to the select board in support of the request for additional staffing. And so that's proposed to start in July. We also are very sad to see our fire chief, after 25 years, move on to retirement. But that transition will be very important to be managed effectively. And so we have some money in the budget, about $30,000 to help with that transition. That will hopefully afford us the ability to have an overlap with the new chief so that the Chief Walker can transfer some of his institutional knowledge to the next chief. But it also allows us to bring the existing officers in the department who are call members up and involved in the department through the transition also. So we're spreading some of that institutional knowledge and ensuring a successful transition in that leadership position. Other areas to maintain the level of service, there's a step increase and a cost of living adjustment for employees. There are a few positions which were started in 2024, which were started later in the year, and so we're funding the next halves of those positions. Moving on to the library, about $300,000 is bond repayment costs. So this portion of the budget will slowly go down over the next 20 years, but this is the first year we're experiencing this bond repayment, and we're seeing that big jump in the budget as a result. There are also additional operating costs, which the library was very transparent about. We're adding a facility to our rolls, so we're going to be paying for utilities, generator maintenance, security system maintenance, and those bills come to a little over $23,000. It's important to keep in mind that we will experience another small jump in 2026 because the library isn't moving into that new building until halfway through the year, right? So that $23,000 represents about 50% of the added operating costs of that building. We'll also have better information on what the actual utility bills will be by the time we're budgeting for 2026. The additional 9% of the budget increase. So inflation is an interesting experience in government budgeting because there's often a delay in when we experience. Because we only budget once per year, we're capturing an entire year's worth of inflation in one cycle. And so depending on where that inflation hits the supply chain, we experience the cost increases at various times throughout the year. So this category of inflation really just captures how much more it costs to maintain the same level of service. $35,000 in additional road supplies and gravel. We were very fortunate to have a gravel pit close where we could have access to good quality material locally. They are prioritizing their supply to feed their own systems now, and so we're having to travel farther and have material trucked in, which has really increased the cost to us just to maintain the same level of service. Transfer station supplies and waste disposal continues to go up. Other highway department supplies, salt and sand, otherwise. Police and fire and welfare assistance is another area. We've been providing a lot of emergency rental assistance, one-time emergency rental assistance, and as rents go up, those assistance dollars go up. A few other things in the operating budget, some improvements to the highway garage as we move our mechanical services out to the back building. And contract custodial, we brought in a contracted custodial service to complement our staff custodians. We did that in 2024 with some available funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, and so that's included in the budget this year. It's also very important to point out that from 2024, there were $172,000 worth of reductions, whether those were one-time expenditures or myself and the finance administrator going through line item by line item with department heads, looking at prior year expenditures and bringing a budget from 500 down to 300 or from 1,000 down to 700. And so those all add up, right? And so there's $172,000 from the 2024 budget, which are not included in the 2025 budget. And I will only labor that point once more to say that means those $172,000 also are not in the default budget, right? So if you budget for something in 2024, but you don't need it in your regular budget in 2025, you're not going to include that in your default budget in 2025 either. And so, unfortunately, because of our form of government, it's common for communities to not reduce anything out of their regular budget because it stays in their default budget and they get it anyways. That's not how we operate in Barrington, right? We have a very diligent select board and advisory budget committee and staff to make sure that the budget we're presenting is what we need to provide the level of services that residents expect in the community. So we've talked about what we do, we've talked about the budget, and I will emphasize the importance of talking about revenue. So in Barrington, and this is something that makes Barrington unique, 46% of what it takes to fund our budget does not come from property taxes, right? Our property tax rate is $2.99, which we'll talk about a little later, is very, very small compared to municipalities across the state, like 6th percentile small. And so that locally collected revenue, because it makes up such a large portion of what it takes to fund our local government, it's important that we track that closely and understand the trends. So this bar chart shows the trends in total revenue with 5 major categories and an other category. And you'll notice that we're budgeting for about 2.5% less revenue in 2025 than we did in 2024. And this is after experiencing an 11% increase between 22 and 23 and a 7% increase between 23 and 24. So those increases were a direct result of 2 things, primarily. First, the state made a renewed commitment to sending the rooms and meals tax distribution to the towns, which are dictated by law. Many, many previous budgets, state budgets, the state suspended that law and just sent a delineated portion of the rooms and meals tax distribution to the towns and cities. So under Governor Sununu's leadership, that was reinstated, and those revenues have continued to increase. So we'll talk more about state revenue in just a minute, but the other area was interest on investments. In the next bar chart, you'll see that our interest on investments have grown tremendously as we've come out of COVID and entered the inflationary period which we're in. So we expect the revenue to grow, the revenue growth to reverse slightly in 2025, and that's factored into the tax rate impact and the other details, the financial details of the town's budget. So again, these trends in non-property tax revenue, you'll see motor vehicle permit fees make up a very large portion, state aid making up the next largest portion. So you can see that growth in state aid from 22 to 24, and we don't expect that to continue. Excuse me. One more note on state aid. Anybody who pays attention to the state budget process, the state is in a budget deficit right now. They're going into a biannual budget process where they're expected to have less revenue than they have in any recent year, and it is very likely that that budget negotiation process will result in less aid to the school and the state, or the town, excuse me. We don't know exactly what that will look like, and I don't expect that to impact our 2025 property taxes, but that's something we'll have to monitor very closely going forward. If the state has to make difficult decisions to retain some of their revenue in things like rooms and meals tax, those costs will be downshifted to taxpayers, and we'll see a tax increase because of that. I wouldn't want their job. It will be a challenging budget process, but it's important that we pay attention to what impacts that will have locally. And then interest on investments. So as we have heard, interest rates are expected to continue to decrease. They've decreased at a slower rate than some anticipated, but we are budgeting for less interest on investments in 2025 than we did in 2024 because of that anticipated reduction. So it's important that this budget is updated in September before the tax rate is set. So the tax rate in 2025 is set based on much more accurate revenue numbers. But for the purposes of residents voting on a budget with their eyes wide open, knowing what to expect for revenue, we're budgeting that revenue conservatively and not expecting the same interest on investments that we have in recent years. We heard about grants. 3 years in a row, Barrington has brought in over $2 million in grants. That $2 million a year is about 22% of our operating budget. And this is really important because Barrington runs such a lean organization. Securing access to these additional funds, which, make no mistake, we're all paying for these grants somewhere, right? Whether it's grants coming from the state or the federal government, we're all paying into that kitty that disperses those grants nationwide. Whether you agree with that mechanism or not doesn't matter. Our job is to make sure as much as that money as possible comes back to Barrington and benefits the residents of the town of Barrington and the money they have to pay. And so most of these projects are not projects that are wish list items that we're just accomplishing. These are critical infrastructure projects, over $600,000 to replace the culverts on the outfall of the dam so we can operate that dam effectively. Implementation of the master plan to ensure that the will of the residents is reflected in the land use rules. So anyways, $2 million in grants is tremendous. We hope that continues, but we expect that in 2025 and beyond, there will likely be less access to those grant funds, and so we'll have to focus on our own planning and local funds more, we expect. So we talked about what we do, we talked about the operating budget, we talked about revenue. Now we'll talk about what impact that budget and the revenue will have on your property taxes. So this table is complicated, but I present the data for two important reasons. One, if you're paying taxes and you're concerned about the taxes, it's important that residents have access to the information on what they're paying for and what impacts what they pay for. And so I won't read through this table, but here's a reference in case anybody's interested. We talked about the budget. In a moment, we'll talk about the warrant articles. We talked about revenue and the impact that has, but there are other factors, which I'll mention in just a minute. Overlay, the credits that we offer in the community, and other fund balance utilization. And so brass tacks, if the operating budget passes, the municipal tax rate will increase 13.7 cents, or about $58 for the average home valued at $425,000. If all of the separate warrant articles pass, that will add another 42.2 cents to the tax rate, or $180 of the tax bill of a $425,000 property. So in total, that would be, if everything passed, that would be a 56-cent increase on the tax rate, or $238 for the average property owner. So in 2024, the tax rate was $17.59. We've talked about how the town's portion is $2.99, and that reflects 17% of the total. I want to mention exemptions and credits for just a minute. So these are really important services that the residents of the town have decided to make available to their neighbors, right? So we have maximized the available veteran credit and service-connected total disability credit in the community, reflective, I think, of our community's commitment to the servicemen and women and that are our neighbors. There are also exemptions, property tax exemptions for the elderly and disabled to make sure that folks can stay in their home if in their advanced years are experiencing financial hardship. So that $602,000 in credits and $232,000 in exemptions represents 45 cents on the tax rate, or 15% of the town's rate. So when you look at the town's rate of $2.99, it's easy to tie that directly to some service that the town provides that maybe you don't care about or maybe you don't use, right? You live on a state road, why are you paying for the highway department? But the makeup of the town's tax rate is a lot more than that, and the exemptions and credits are a good example. In 2019, the credits provided were $300,000, and just a few short years later, in 2024, we're talking $600,000. That's the equivalent of a 30-cent increase between those years on the tax rate. And so it's important that we pay attention to those and the impact that has on the taxes that we pay. So the tax base, the total assessed value of the entire town, is kind of the third leg of the stool, right? You have your appropriations, you have your revenue, and then you have the total tax base. And growth in the tax base helps positively affect the tax rate and the taxes people pay, right? Because it's spread out among more property tax payers. And so in 2024, we added over $31 million in new value, and that reflects a 1.7% increase. So these are items like TurboCam expanding. These are some of the residential properties that you're seeing be constructed. And so you'll remember in 2024, the town approved the first tax increment financing district. And the basis of that district is it captures, in a certain geographic area, it captures that new value and allows those captured taxes to be invested in that district. The voters approved that district to purchase the 13-acre Barrington Common property. That district is a lot smaller than initially proposed, and that district captured 10% of the total value added in town, or just over $3.2 million. So the vast majority of the new value in town is expanding the tax base and resulting in reduced taxes if that value didn't exist. And of that 10%, the largest portion comes from the property right across the street from the middle school, those apartments over there. That's included in the district. But only 17% of the value of that property is captured as new value. Most of that project was fully constructed before the district was approved. And so still the vast majority of that property, that residential property, as an example, is on the tax base and not captured in the district. So I told you I'd explain again the comparison of Barrington's tax rate to the 234 other towns and cities in the state. And this I always find this remarkable. But our lean municipal government, our history of a lean municipal government, has resulted in setting Barrington far apart from our other towns and cities, to the point where even though our population is the 87th percentile, our municipal property tax rate per capita is the 6th percentile, meaning that there are only 12 towns and cities in the state that have a smaller municipal tax rate per capita than Barrington. And these towns and cities are towns, there are no cities. These 12 towns are towns that don't have a police department, right? State police does their law enforcement. They have an all-volunteer fire department still. And so we are in a class of our own as a municipal government, and we're able to do a lot and provide excellent services to the community, but it is on a shoestring budget, and we pay very close attention to that. And those numbers track whether you're comparing it to the total value, we're the 83rd percentile, or the land area, we're the 80th percentile, but our municipal tax rate is very small. Another valuable metric, in my opinion, is looking at the taxes residents are actually paying. Right? So tax rates depend on the value, and values change the tax rate. And so if you're looking just in Barrington At a home in 2013, the average home value was $250,000. So that average homeowner in 2013 was paying a total of $5,615 in taxes. That same average homeowner in 2023, their home was assessed at $425,000, and they paid a total of $7,093. That's a 26% increase over 10 years. During that same 10-year period, the taxes paid to the municipal government, the taxes paid to the town, went down $30 and not corrected for inflation. So in 2013, that resident paid $1,165 to the town, and in 2023, they paid $1,131. And so if you look at that change, 2013 to 2023, the portion paid to the town went down 3% during a 10-year period where inflation was 31%. And so if you correct that for inflation, the average taxpayer is paying around 34% less to the town in 2023 than they did in 2013. Obviously, the total rate increased 26%, the education portion increased 37%, and the portion to the county increased 15%. And so the town government operates very lean, and that's because of a tradition of only asking for the funding necessary to provide the level of service expected by the residents and set by the select board. So on to my favorite part, which is hopefully questions and discussion about the budget and details about the services we provide to the community. I'll again mention that the budget binder is available electronically, and you're welcome, anybody is welcome to reach out at any time with questions about not only the budget, but anything else going on in town.
Thanks, Connor. Any comments from the select board? From the ABC? Any comments from the floor? Comments or questions? All right, come on up to the mic, please.
Gilbert Smith, Oak Hill Road, 272. I just have a question. I reviewed the detail in the budget, and the question that I have relates to the unassigned fund balance and how it's computed and what it includes. And the reason I'm asking the question is my understanding is that the town is an SB2 and the school district is an SB2, which is two separate legal entities. But when I looked at the unassigned fund balance, it's computed against the total real estate tax rate, which would include the school SB2. I believe it's projected to be around $5 million at the end of 2024, which is, I think, 12.5 or 12.8% if you take the total real estate revenue. I also looked at the capital improvement program that the select board did this year, which is unique, and you guys, thank you for doing that. In reviewing that, I noticed within that, it also includes discussions of what would be used at the school in terms of potentially building an elementary school. So, being the crazy guy I am, I went to the school budget and looked at the same thing, and they also have an unassigned fund balance that they're running. So my question becomes, if they're two separate SB2 units, why is the town justifying we're looking at their unassigned fund balance as if they're including the school into it because they're two separate legal entities? That makes sense to you.
It's an excellent question. So unassigned fund balance is essential for cash flow primarily, and it's important to know that unassigned fund balance can only be spent by town meeting, right, or through an emergency procedure through the Department of Revenue Administration. But the select board and the school board, for their purpose, they can't spend extra dollars outside of what's approved by town meeting. So it is the generally accepted accounting practices and the Department of Revenue Administration that say for best practices, a community should hold between 8 and 17% of their total regular general fund operating expenditures in unassigned fund balance. And again, that range is set primarily for cash flow. So you're exactly right that percentage is applied to the total taxes that the town collects, which we saw earlier was about $32 million. And so we pay in December, before we even issue the second half tax bill, or certainly before they're due, we pay the entire county taxes payment to the county, right? Every month we make a $2 million payment, more than a $2 million payment to the school, because we collect those taxes and we pay those to them. The town only collects property taxes twice a year. right? A billing in July and a billing typically in December. And so that unassigned fund balance and the range of 8 to 17%, for which the select board has a policy, which is on the town's website, which says to target 12.5%. And you're right, it's at 12.8% right now. And so that target of 12.5%, equal to about $5 million, allows us to pay all of our bills throughout the year, which it's typically November and June when we have the smallest available balance. But we can still pay those bills before we bring in the next billing of property taxes. And so what a lot of communities do is they don't have that fund balance and they borrow. A tax anticipation note, it's called. And they pay interest on borrowing those monies so they can make their payments to the school or the county. So the unassigned fund balance level is very important. Now to the school by statute is allowed to hold a maximum of 2.5% of their budget, just their budget, in unassigned fund balance. And the school does that. They maintain that balance, and anything above that balance goes to reduce the taxes every year. Every year it's around $400,000 or $500,000 that goes to reduce the taxes. And so the school's 2.5% is important for the school just for the same reason it's important for the town. The town makes about a $2 million payment to the school every month, but the school's expenditures are not linear, right? Their expenditures are a lot lower in the summer months, but a lot higher in the winter months where they have the higher utility costs and other expenditures. And so they have that 2.5%, so they're not coming back to the town and saying, actually, this month we need $3 million. This month we need $3.5 million. And so that buffers their expenditures so they can meet their obligations for accounts payable and payroll. But importantly, the school board cannot spend that money. And so, yes, that money exists. It's a good security blanket for the town. It's very financially responsible to have unassigned fund balance at that level. Your second point was about the capital improvement program, which is notably an entirely separate topic. So at times, yes, the select board or the school board have asked voters, again, it's only voters that can make this decision, but have asked voters to take some of that unassigned fund balance, usually the amount above and beyond what the level is. For the select board, it's 12.5%. For the school board, it's 2.5%, and ask the community to invest those dollars in projects, capital reserve contributions or otherwise. But the correlation between the capital improvement program and those unassigned fund balances kind of stops there. The capital improvement program, by statute, if you have a zoning ordinance, you're required to have a capital improvement program. And that capital improvement program should include projects from the school as well. And the primary purpose, or one of the primary purposes of the capital improvement program, is to make sure that you are planning for the large investments in the community in the future. So you're not stacking all of those up in the same year, right? Imagine if the community was presented with a $13 million road infrastructure bond, a $5 million public safety building bond, a $3.3 million library bond, and a $10 million elementary school bond in the same year. That would be terrible planning, right? Well, that document is a way that the decision makers, mostly the select board and the school board, but can see all of the projects, the identified needs in the community, and can work together to stagger those projects to make sure that the residents don't experience a significant increase in their responsibility or burden at any one time. Good questions. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Last call. Okay, Article 15 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 16, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $250,000 to be added to the Highway Heavy Equipment Capital Reserve Fund previously established. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15, the operating budget article. This article is projected to add 13.2 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $56 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This article is recommended by the Budget Committee 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Gibson.
The Highway Heavy Equipment Capital Reserve was established in 1981. Current balance is $158,444. The requested contribution is $250,000. It's recommended, as was said by the ABC and the Select Board, purposes for saving for highway department equipment purchases. Some of the planned future uses include replacing a 6-wheel dump truck, replacing a 1-ton pickup truck, replacing a 30-year-old grader. As was said earlier, we really appreciate in Barrington the roads. Mark Moreau and the highway team do a fantastic job maintaining and keeping us safe. These long-term planning is, as with many of these capital improvement requests, are a wise way to save. When it comes to highway equipment in particular, the lead time to replace the equipment, the specialized equipment they have, can be many, many months. And if you're trying to replace something in a scramble because of an emergency, you're forced to get models that are not appropriate, that are more costly. You may have to borrow money and pay interest. So this kind of planning so that we can schedule out these purchases is just a really wise way to contain costs, to ensure that we have the appropriate equipment and that the highways are being maintained.
Any other select board comments? ABC comments? Comments from the floor? Anybody? Okay, don't see any. Article 16 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 17, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $200,000 for road paving and reconstruction. This special warrant article will be a non-lapsing appropriation pursuant to RSA 32:7, Roman numeral 5, and will not lapse until December 31, 2026. This appropriation is in addition to warrant article 15. This article is projected to add 10.6 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $45 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. The ABC recommends this 5-0, Select Board 5-0. Select Person Manshreck.
This non-lapsing $200,000 is added to the $700,000 as part of the operating budget for a total of about $900,000 appropriated for maintenance of the roads. In the 2021 survey of our highway and our highway needs, it was proposed that we would use almost $1 million a year to keep our roads in the shape that they're in, to improve those that need improvement. This will be close to that $1 million to add in. This is not exactly a non-lapsing. It does in fact lapse at the end of 2026, but allows a lot of flexibility depending on what is available and what we can do, depending on the season, above the $700,000 as part of the operating budget.
Okay, any other select board comments? ABC comments? Comments from the floor? Okay, don't see any. Article 17 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 18, to see if the town will vote to establish a municipal facilities and maintenance capital reserve under the provisions of RSA 35:1 for the purpose of funding renovations, improvements, upgrades, repairs, and maintenance to municipal facilities and infrastructure, and to raise and appropriate the sum of $80,000 to be placed in this fund. Further, to name the select board as agents to expend from said fund. This appropriation is in addition to warrant article 15. This article is projected to add 4.2 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $18 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Hardikoff.
I get to talk about the new fund that's going before the residents this year. As we have built out a new town hall, as we are building out a new library, as we are approaching the residents, voters of this town to talk about our public safety building improvements, we're very aware that our municipal facilities will require a long-range plan. And funding for the facility care and maintenance is what is included in this article that is being brought to the voters this year. Some of the planned future use includes the required pad that would be going in at the fuel depot, boiler replacement at the public safety building. We've talked a lot about parking lot maintenance and striping in our meetings at different times. And facilities improvement and maintenance means basically investing in what we have already chosen in years past to build. So this will be new, and the purpose of it is to take that capital improvement program that exists and have steady financing to ensure that we can go forward with keeping all of the buildings up to par.
Okay, any other select board comments? ABC comments? Comments from the floor? Okay. Article 18 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 19, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $50,000 to be added to the fire truck capital reserve fund previously established. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15. The article is projected to add 2.6 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $11 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This article is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Cappiello.
Thank you. So this account was established in 1988, so we've been adding to it for a very long time. Currently, we have $624,546, and we're requesting an additional $50,000 be added to it. It's recommended by both the ABC and the Select Board. So the Department of Fire and Safety so far has planned out to 2032 in terms of equipment. So they expect in 2026 they'll have to replace the Smeel pumper E1 in 2027, the 2017 Dodge 4x4 extended cab pickup in 2030, the 2006 Chevrolet rescue truck, in 2032, the 2007 Smeel pumper E2. I mean, you can see these are sort of old equipment that has been very well maintained by our fire department, and we give them credit for keeping this equipment moving along on our roads for so long. And I hope you will vote on this. Thank you.
Okay, any other select board comments? ABC comments? Yes, come on up.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jackie Silly of Oak Hill Road. Not that I'm looking to spend more money, but we've been setting aside $50,000 almost every year for as long as I can remember. There is evidence that the fire trucks and the pump trucks have increased dramatically this year. Pump trucks going from 500,000 to $1 million. Regular fire trucks going from $1 million to $2 million. And the situation in Los Angeles has added pressure to that. They lost a lot of equipment, so there'll be a greater demand. So my question is, are we putting away enough? Because for all the reasons that we do this budgeting, we don't want to be hit in any one given year.
I'm happy to answer that question, and then the fire chief stood up. We can tag team on that. So you're absolutely correct that the cost of apparatus continues to increase. And especially as it relates to the engines, it's possible that the best financial decision for the future might not be forever to save cash and pay cash for a $1.3 million fire truck. That starts to not be sustainable in the long term as those costs continue to increase. As it relates to the fire department and their management of this fund, we are very fortunate to have a department that is focused on finding the most affordable solution that still maintains the level of service. And so a great example is buying a new cabin chassis and remounting the body for pieces of apparatus, or otherwise refurbishing pieces of equipment, which, as you heard, our equipment is very well maintained. And so it's possible, although they're in the equipment replacement schedule as full replacements, it's possible that one of the two fire engines will be refurbished, will be rebuilt at a much lower cost than buying 2 new engines. And so the Advisory Budget Committee toiled with finding ways to reduce the burden for residents this year, and reduced most of the capital reserve contributions. And so this one was one that was reduced as well. It was $100,000 last year, and the original proposal this year was $100,000, reduced to $50,000. And in the future, it may need to be increased depending on what the next couple of pieces of equipment, how we replace those, what the cost is. And I'll also point out that the fire department has a fire and ambulance revolving fund, which residents voted last year to agree to put 100% of ambulance revenue into that account each year. That accumulates about $160,000 a year, and that funds some of the day-to-day operations of the fire department with staffing, some of the on-call staff, and will also be the fund used to replace the ambulance. And so there are other funds available in the future if we needed to reach a certain threshold and the account balance was too low. But I'll turn over to the fire chief. I'm sure he has additional comments.
Thank you. You stole most of my thunder, but it is important to understand that years ago there were a vast number of fire apparatus manufacturers in the United States, and over time bigger conglomerates have come in and bought out the smaller companies, and in many cases the bigger corporations own a number of apparatus manufacturers under different umbrellas, so that while it's still possible to go out and do competitive bidding on fire apparatus, most of that money is all going in the same pocket, and raw materials and other things have driven the price up. And you're exactly right. When we bought the 2007 Smeal, which is pictured on the slideshow there, we paid $287,000 for that truck. To replace that truck tomorrow morning, and that's a pretty basic truck. We don't put a lot of bells and whistles on them. We just want to be able to go do the job they're intended to do. That truck today, in today's dollars, is around $800,000. Manufacturers are currently speccing these trucks at over $1 million. So certainly by the time the town gets to the point where they need to actually replace that vehicle, it's going to be north of $1 million. And the town administrator is correct that the town fathers and stuff will have to look at other ways to finance these things, because to put enough money away on a regular basis, you're going to be talking hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. So we may move into a situation in a few years where it'll be more economical for the town to look at bonding these purchases. That being said, we are, a couple of years ago, our tanker, we put a new cabin chassis underneath the poly tank that we had bought in 1994, and we basically refurbished the tanker for about a little under $200,000. Replacing that truck in kind would have been a $500,000 deal a couple of years ago. We're due to take delivery at any time of a new forestry truck. That is a Ford chassis, four-wheel drive with a utility body on the back. We bought a slide-in unit for forestry services a couple of years ago. That's going to go in there. That truck will end up setting the town back about $100,000. And currently the officers are working on a plan to come back to the select board to refurbish engine 1. Again, rather than spending $700,000 or $800,000, they'll probably be able to refurbish that truck for about $150,000. And the important part is both of our frontline engines are old enough that they don't have the emission systems, the catalytic converters and stuff on them. So it's a feeling of the guys that are there at the department now to try to hang on to them trucks as long as we can, because once you start messing with these trucks with catalytic converters on them, they become very expensive to maintain, and the highway department's going through that now. Just when they break down, they get to be expensive. So I know it's kind of long-winded, but certainly supporting putting money away for the future purchase of fire apparatus will keep the town where they need to be. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Any other comments? Susan?
Susan Gaudiello, Franklin Pierce Highway. My question is really a more general one about a number of the warrant articles. I certainly support setting aside money for the fire equipment and appreciate the frugality that the fire chief and the department has managed there. My question is that I'm noticing that in past years we've often had a reduction in the tax impact by the use of monies from the fund surplus, and I'm not seeing that in any this year. I don't know what the status of that is. I think, Connor, you mentioned that it's a little bit over what the goal is. So I'm wondering if you could explain what the situation is, what the dollars is, and why you haven't chosen to use any of those dollars to reduce perhaps the most critical of the warrant articles.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and certainly folks that participate in this process year over year, that is a notable difference. So unassigned fund balance grows in two primary ways. The first way unassigned fund balance grows is with unexpended appropriations from the prior year. So we budget for $9.8 million. When we spend $9.5 million, that $300,000 reverts to unassigned fund balance. Second primary way it grows is with revenue in excess of projections. We talked earlier that when we set the tax rate, we use September 1st revenue numbers to identify what the tax rate will be set on based on for the locally collected revenue. And so if and when we exceed those projections, those dollars revert to unassigned fund balance. So good, bad, or indifferent, Barrington had a history of unexpended appropriations have been pretty level, although they have reduced. But Barrington had a tradition of dramatically underestimating revenue and collecting a lot more than was estimated, and that reverts to unassigned fund balance. And that's not how I operate. That's not the direction of the select board, the direction of the advisory budget committee. So over the past 5 or 6 years, we've been able to bring the budget much closer to the specific dollars and cents we need to provide the services to the community. So we're adding less unassigned fund balance from unexpended appropriations. And we also pay very close attention to revenue, and we don't underestimate our revenue on purpose. We estimate our revenue as practically as possible to make sure that we are presenting a clear financial picture to the community. Our auditors have noticed that transition and have recognized and applauded the town's work on that. The advisory budget committee has recognized that, as has the select board. And so the net result of that process, budgeting the expenditures and the revenue closer to actual, is we're contributing less to unassigned fund balance year over year. And so there's less availability of what we call surplus unassigned fund balance, being that unassigned fund balance above the 12.5% target used to contribute to warrant articles. So there are many other factors with unassigned fund balance, but the specific reason that the select board and the advisory budget committee are not choosing to fund any portion of the articles from unassigned fund balance is because there isn't much at all surplus unassigned fund balance this year. And that's one of the reasons, and I'll just put this slide up because it's topical. You saw a similar bar chart with the operating budget. This was the separate warrant article requests. So the initial request from department heads was $1,258,000. That compares to a total from last year approved by voters of $1.3 million. Now, in 2024, half of that $1.3 million was funded from surplus unassigned fund balance. So through the deliberative process and compromise and negotiations, the final proposal for voters this year is a total of separate warrant articles of just under $800,000, $798,000. And so That is in part because of the lack of availability of surplus unassigned fund balance to fund portions of these articles. The Budget Committee wanted to make sure that the residents weren't hit with a dramatic increase in a property tax burden to make up the difference. I hope that answers your question.
Any other questions?
I think the exact amount was
Joyce?
around, what, 160,000?
Hold on. I can't hear Joyce.
Extra.
One more time.
Can you just clarify the exact amount? I think it was around 160,000.
116,000. So that 0.3%, so 12.5% is the target, 12.8% is where we expect to be once all of our books are audited for 2024, and that reflects a little over $100,000. And so that availability, we didn't divide that $100,000 among, all of the separate warrant articles.
Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, Article 19 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 20, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $50,000 to be added to the Police Equipment Capital Reserve Fund previously established. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15, the operating budget article. This article is projected to add 2.6 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $11 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This article is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Gibson.
The Police Equipment Capital Reserve, established in 2021, has a current balance of $105,620. The requested contribution is $50,000. As stated, it is fully recommended by the ABC and our Select Board. And the purpose is to save for large equipment purchases to avoid budget spikes, like is done with many of these capital reserve requests. Some of the planned future use includes cruiser data equipment, body cameras, tasers, cruiser radars, communications equipment. And as we all know, technology is constantly changing, and trying to keep up with and having our officers well equipped leads to better safety and efficiency for the officers, and also leads obviously to better safety and security for our residents.
Thank you. Any other comments up here? ABC comments? Any comments from the floor? The police chief is about to speak.
I'm going to keep it short and sweet, unlike Rick. A lot of what we considered in the past to be maybe for police equipment is no longer. Tasers. I can't imagine sending my officers on the road without tasers at this point in time. I worked the majority of my career without them, and it's asinine to think that we can do it anymore. They're an essential tool. Body cameras, again, they were a maybe prior. Every police agency that's worth its salt now is mandatory. So all of those things have increased in cost. The technology's increased. What I'm wearing on my hip now is no longer serviced by Taser, and it'll soon reach the point where we'll basically be negligent for wearing these. So for a little bit of money, you're looking at saving the town a lot in potential lawsuits coming down the pike. MDTs, same thing. Since we've did them 2 years ago, the replacement factor for those in 2 more years is going to be about double, if I had to guess. We'll be looking for grants, just like we did before, but to not have that technology with us, it's mandatory at this point. It's not an if anymore.
Thanks, George. Any other comments? Okay, Article 20 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 21, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $30,000 to be added to the dam repair / engineering / replacement capital reserve fund previously established. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15. This article is projected to add 1.6 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $7 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This article is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Cappiello.
So Article 21 is to repair, engineer, and then replace town dams. And we've been setting aside money since 2017. Right now we have $442,943. And the requested contribution is $30,000. And it's supported by the ABC and the Select Board. We're looking at upgrades to Swains Lake Dam. We have done some of the above the dam repairs already. Now we're looking at underwater gate repairs and riprap filter. And so it'll be used towards that.
Thanks, Joyce. Any other comments from the board? ABC comments? Comments from the floor? John.
John Wallace on Mary Hill Road. Just a question. As we know, at least one other town owns at least one other dam, that on Richardson Pond on the Goodwill property. I'm just wondering if some of this capital reserve fund couldn't be utilized for the replacement repair of that dam, which, as you all know, needs to happen in the not too distant future.
Right. Yes, it could be used for that. We don't have all of the reports back from the state on information about taking down the dam. We had information on the cost of repairing it, but not of all the pros and cons of taking it down, and we're still waiting on that.
Okay, any other comments?
Things take a long time from the state, I'm learning.
Okay. Article 21 will appear on a ballot as written. Article 22, to see if the town will vote to establish a park facilities and maintenance capital reserve under the provisions of RSA 35:1 for the purpose of funding renovations, improvements, upgrades, repairs, and maintenance to park facilities and infrastructure. And to raise and appropriate the sum of $20,000 to be placed in this fund. Further, to name the Select Board as agents to expend from said fund. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15. This article is projected to add 1.1 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $4 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. The ABC does not recommend this article by a vote of 3-2, and the article is supported by the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Sakosha.
Excellent. So in studio and online, it's pretty hard to go anywhere in this town that hasn't been touched and infected in a good way by our Parks and Rec department, and a huge shout out and credit to that team. This is new in 2025, and the request contribution is $20,000. It's also recommended by the Select Board. And the purpose behind this is funding the park and maintenance plans that are included in the capital improvement plan. But the immediate plans for this would be at Ramsdell Lane for wood chips and maintenance, park seating, fence and sign maintenance, and maintenance for playground features.
Thank you. Any other Select Board comments? Tracy?
This is my personal opinion, and that is that the residents of the town of Barrington speak often of their sense of community, and our Parks and Recreation Department is a lot of why that sense of community still lives here within this town. It is often spoken of when people move to town, how surprised they are to feel that sense of community. My hope is that the residents and voters support this fund so that as the Parks and Recreation continues to do that work of bonding all of us, they have the facilities and the locations available to continue to have all the programming that's available.
Thank you. Any comments from the ABC? Peter?
Farida, Peter first, and then
Peter Royce,
the moderator will get you.
Recognize first.
Just 1 second.
Okay.
Upstairs, Mike.
Should work. Okay. Quiet now.
Try again?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. That I think I'm speaking for the other negatives on this vote from the ABC, and that we thought this really was an operating cost and should be in the operating budget rather than as a warrant article. And again, I suspect it would be something we would see every year, but we just thought it was misplaced as a warrant article. Do my colleagues agree with that assessment? Bill and...
I'm seeing a nod.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Jesse?
So Jesse Tennis, Peter, I think you underestimated me. Recreation Director. So this request was presented as the department has continued to grow to meet the needs of the community. Most of you have probably participated in our free 7-week-long summer concert series and additional, free programs that we've been offering. So as we continue to expand, we have started to kind of limit the amount of available funds within the revolving fund without being able to kind of limit some of our future offerings or expanded opportunities. So with the playground or the park not really having any revenue coming in, but having substantial annual costs with the maintenance, wood chips, all those type of things. Our request was basically to ask for this capital reserve to relieve some of that funds in the revolving fund to be able to reallocate to recreational programs, equipment, and still be able to provide a safe place for people to be able to spend their time with their families. So that was the intent of the request. So.
Thanks, Jesse. Any other comments?
Simone Booty, Old Settlers Road. I just wanted to speak in support of this. I was a young mother in 2012, 2010, and I used to have to go to Jackson's Landing and hang out and try to meet other young mothers, kind of stalk them and be like, oh, are you going to talk to me? And so I think it's just a really important thing as this town grows, and there are probably other young mothers that are stuck on Old Settlers Road that would like to meet people. And I think that our outdoor spaces need to be supported, and so that young mothers can have some, or fathers can have some social interaction. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Hi, Frida Shagassi. I'm a member of Advisory Board Committee. I was one of the people that actually I said yes to this request. I think it's very important that our parks are maintained, and it should be planned. I think safety of children are very important, and Barrington has a lot of young children. And the money that was aside for reserve, capital reserve for recreation, I think it's used for a lot of other means, especially for events. So I'm all for it. And the impact is so low. It's 1.1 cents, $4. I think everybody can afford that. To have safe parks for our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott?
Shepherd Birch Lane. In approaching this budget this year, I think a lot of my feeling was centered on the idea that we're going to have a large bond next year. And I think it's going to be hard to get that through the voters. And so when looking at this, I was really focused on wants, not needs. Now, I think it is a need, and I support the Recreation Department 100%. But I think in some ways, yes, it should belong in the operating budget, and I would have supported it there. I think by bringing it out into a separate warrant article, it actually has a different perception by many in the community that it's actually a want, not a need. And so as I was looking at this, it's not that I don't think we should do this, but I really wanted to demonstrate to town voters that we are really focusing on the needs, not wants. And the problem with putting in a warrant article is it sort of sets up this idea that we're going to continue to add to it, and we're going to continue to add more, and it will expand. And I'm sensitive to that. And so, that was my reason for voting no.
Thanks, Scott. Any other comments? Tracy?
I absolutely appreciate all of the members of our advisory budget committee and all of the work that they've done this year. In reference to the parks and recreation, 3 years ago, I built out a local homeless shelter within driving distance to Barrington, and one of the things I built out there was a playground for children that were unhoused and living at the shelter. Ready for this term? The splinterless wood chips that I was required to put on that playground so that children could have a fenced-in area on 202 and be safe, at a discount, cost $4,483 for a small playground. It is probably close to $20,000 just to ensure that the playground on Ramsdale, and I could be wrong, but close to that, to ensure that annually these splinterless wood chips that keep the children from breaking bones when they jump off equipment is replaced each year. And so being able to plan for that, I think, is very important. The other thing I'll point out is that playground, if you read like local Stratford and Rochester sites, that playground in this area of the Seacoast is very well known to young parents. And they actually talk about bringing their kids from out of town to enjoy that playground and interface with other children.
Thank you. Connor?
Just one quick note on the difference between budgeting in an operating budget and a capital reserve. So these costs are certainly operating in nature, right? Just like you heard from the police chief that the costs for a taser and a body-worn camera are very operating in nature. What those costs aren't are regular. And so for the tasers and the body-worn camera, we want to contribute a regular amount each year so that when we need to make that $150,000 expenditure, we're not raising $150,000 in the operating budget in that one year. For the playground maintenance, similarly, those shade structures will need to be replaced eventually, and large pieces of the playground equipment will need to be replaced, and those will be significant costs. And so the idea in establishing a capital reserve isn't to put these costs in a capital reserve and not the operating budget if they're more operating in nature, but it's to make sure that we have a mechanism to start saving for these larger pieces of infrastructure replacement in the future. And so certainly in 2025, the planned utilization of this fund is very operating in nature. And those approximately $20,000 in expenditures would certainly be regular on a basis. And you can actually go on the town's website and see the facility maintenance plan for the next 3 or 5 years that the Recreation Department prepared in support of this article. And there are small fluctuations, but having a mechanism to save to be able to ask the community to save in the future and accumulate funds to fund larger replacement activities in the future was part of the motivation. And it could be something, depending on how the vote goes, we look at separating those two tasks out, right? Putting some of the more operating in nature costs, requesting that in the operating budget. I will note that if you look at the Recreation Department's operating budget, there are only 3 things in that budget, and that's 3 staff positions. They don't even buy copy paper out of the operating budget in the Recreation Department. That's all paid for out of the revolving fund. And so it is just the wages and benefits of 3 positions in the operating budget. And so there isn't even, with our existing operating budget, there isn't even a tradition of funding the operating costs of the department, let alone the park facilities. So just some additional context. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, yep, Alex.
Good morning, Alexander Samako, Brooks Road. I will admit that, recreation is important, but looking at the language here, is a red flag in my little lawyer brain, because you have renovations, improvements, and upgrades, okay, long-term planning for continuing to provide this service to the town, but then you have repairs and maintenance. So I guess my question is, that seems like a possible liability for the town if we are needing to turn to warrant articles to fund maintenance on these public, facilities. So is that just perhaps a poor language choice, or are we talking about long-term planning for maintenance of bigger items Because the way that that reads is just a little bit concerning. So can you clarify that?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So two things. First and foremost, if there were a liability issue at the playground, I feel very confident that the select board with its available funds, whether in the incident fund or otherwise, or the Recreation Commission with available funds in the Recreation Revolving Fund, would fund that liability concern whether this capital reserve account exists or not. So I don't want residents to feel like if this article isn't passed, we may have a liability concern at the playground. Certainly not the case. Relative to the language and the confusing language, so the state law is rather strict in financial mechanisms, right? We have an operating budget that voters approve in March, and those funds lapse on December 31st. So the state makes available certain other financial tools, capital reserve account being one of the most popular, but also trust funds and other revolving funds for narrow and very specific purposes. As it relates to capital reserve accounts, it is most important when a capital reserve account is first established to establish that account with the purpose statement, which includes any possible future expenditure from that account. And so, although we might not have the immediate plan to spend money for every aspect of that purpose statement, once a capital reserve account is created, it actually takes a 60% vote of the residents to change the purpose. And so the trustees of the trust fund, of which there are a couple in the audience today, one of their very important roles is to make sure that when the select board authorize an expenditure from a capital reserve account, those trustees of the trust fund, which are elected by you all, are comparing those expenditure requests against the originally established purpose statement. And so we heard earlier today that many of these capital reserve accounts have been around for decades. And so whenever we establish a capital reserve account, we try to write a purpose statement which considers all of the topical and possible expenditures from that account in the future. And so, yes, it reads broad, and there might not be, planned expenditures for those specific items. But this body can amend that purpose statement, can narrow that purpose statement. For those of you that have been around for a while, you'll remember we had this conversation relative to the Library and Community Center capital reserve account. That account was written with a broad purpose statement, and some folks in the community had concern that it was too broad and that it would snowball. And we worked through those. That ended up being okay, and we'll be closing that account out soon as the new library is constructed. So I hope that addresses the two questions, one about the liability and two about the kind of broad purpose statement, which again, I'll read that. The purpose statement, and this is the specific, nothing in the future, if this article passes, can be spent unless it applies to this purpose statement, for the purpose of funding renovations, improvements, upgrades, repairs, and maintenance to park facilities and infrastructure. So that's the core part. The trustee of the trust funds will be looking back to maybe for decades if the article passes and we continue utilizing it.
David?
In addition, I would suggest that when we say maintaining these parks, it may include not just fixing the things that we have, but to maintain a park also may include additional capital expenditures, new equipment, different equipment that we don't have right now as part of maintaining the park as something that's useful for the entire community.
Jim?
So these meetings are easy to get lost in, and one crucial point that I wanted to just have everybody know was Jessica's financial responsibilities to the rec when she mentioned that this is something that doesn't necessarily bring a lot of income into the rec department, so I think that's worth bearing and noting. And two, as far as maintenance, some of you might be thinking, okay, maintenance-wise, what could we be doing to a playground or park? Some things that can happen are vandalism, whether it's painting or being destructive to equipment. Not to exclude the grounds. Say if somebody drives on the player area and rips it up, that's going to have to get replaced too. Even an incident if a plow truck goes off. So those are little kind of quick examples that I could think of to present to you guys to maybe make a better decision.
Thank you. Okay, Diane.
Diane St. Jean, Small Road. This sounds like a worthy warrant article to me, but I just wanted to ask the question, how many parks do we have in Barrington? I recall somebody telling me at one time that the Kids of the River Trail is considered a park. So I just want to know, do we have any other parks?
That's an excellent question. It depends on your definition of park. One of the things that I am hopeful for as we move forward, and I'll give a plug to a project which we're starting actually on Monday night, Barrington has a tremendous availability of outdoor resources. And if by the broadest definition of a park, we consider all of our outdoor community resources as parks, then we have many. The Conservation Commission has a history in this town of securing very valuable property for permanent conservation, and with their work and with other partners in the Trails Committee, developing trails on those properties. So Kids of the River Trail, the Goodwill property, Winnie the Pooh Trail, and countless others. So the Recreation Department is not responsible for those parks. So there's a separation in definition that way. The plug that I want to give is there's a UNH Cooperative Extension has a program that they call Downtowns and Trails. And it's a equally community and economic development program where they bring in professional staff from UNH to lead a session. It's going to be about a 6-month project, and I hope you all will hear more about it, where they're going to be looking at the core of Barrington in the town center, but evaluating all of our recreational opportunities, whether it be trails or parks, and how those tie together to bring the community together, but also improve the economic outlook for the businesses in town. And so I hope through that process we will start to be a little bit more organized about how we project to not only our residents, but the greater Barrington community about our natural resources that are open to the public and are park-like. So as it exists right now, the Ramsdale Lane Park is probably the only permanent existing park by the strictest definition. The Barrington Common property is in some ways right now, because it's the most affordable, most economical thing to do, there's aspects of that property which are being used as a park, right? The truck show is coming back in August. Portions of the soiree were programmed there. We developed a trail that we had a pumpkin stroll through. So that is very park-like also. So we hope to have a better definition. If I'm sitting here again next year, I hope we can explain how we are going about our park definition and advertisement in a more organized way. But you bring up an important point in that we have work to do in clarifying and kind of having a consistent message about our recreational resources.
Okay, anybody else on Article 22? Okay, the article will appear on the ballot as written. Article 23, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $15,000 to be added to the Bridge and Culvert Capital Reserve Fund previously established. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15. The article is projected to add 0.8 cent per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $3 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Hardikoff.
Who gave me the most boring articles to present? So we currently have a balance of $625,958 in this. As mentioned, it is for ensuring that our bridge and culvert projects are continuing to be funded, because each time we receive a grant, which we've done an excellent job, by the way, of securing grants for the purposes of bridges and culvert repairs or replacement, we are required to often match 20% for these aid programs. Hats off to our staff for having planned shelf-ready projects each time so that we can apply for grants. Future use of this fund, Young Road Causeway Culvert near the State Boat Launch will be worked on, and the Pond Hill culvert replacement near Daniel Cater Road. Some examples of what 20% has gone to in the past are potentially the Malago Road Bridge you may have driven across, and the beautiful Green Hill Bridge that we are now no longer taking our lives in our hands as we pass by our neighbors on.
Thank you. Any other select board comments? ABC comments? Any comments from the floor? Okay. Article 23 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 24, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $15,000 to be added to the transfer station and recycling center capital reserve fund previously established. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15. The article is projected to add 0.8 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $3 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This article is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Mantrek.
This warrant, or this particular capital reserve account was established in 2022. Right now it actually has $41,000 in it. There was a feasibility study that's being looked at very carefully by the Transfer Station Committee. Very extensive recommendation, but the most recent one is to include paving in the area. A variety of reasons that will be particularly useful. In order to pay for that, which the estimated cost is around $55,000, add an additional $15,000 to this. It's going to have to be, probably will be a continuing process as the Transfer Station Committee begins to evaluate how we can incorporate all these improvements. We also have to consider that the cost of our trash movement, our transfer station, probably will increase significantly in the next couple of years as our contract with waste management has to be re-evaluated in 2026, 2027. So those prices are going to go up, and the facilities will probably need further monies involved, but we're not sure what that is at this point. So this is to get us through this year.
Okay, thanks. Any other select board comments? ABC comments? Comments from the floor? Yes, Julia.
Julian Olivier, Beauty Hill Road. If appropriate, could we have an update on the recycling part of the transfer station? I mean, word is out that it's costing us more. We're really not recycling. What is being recycled and what is not? In fact, are all my bottles costing money? We're no longer selling that. What's the situation?
It's an excellent question, and in one word, the situation is dynamic. So the recycling market, for anybody that's paid attention for a couple of years, there's something called the China sword. And that China sword was not just China, but a lot of Asian countries which were accepting large volumes of single stream recycling and integrating that into a supply chain for recycling. And that has gone away. And so there was a period where it was costing quite a bit more to recycle single stream supply of recycling than it did previously, because there was no market for it in the United States. And so there is a market, and one of the reasons that users of the transfer station see pretty regular updates to what is and isn't being accepted, mostly with the plastics, right? So what number's inside your triangle? That matters a lot because of the markets available for those recycled goods. So what happens to your recycling when you bring it to the transfer station? First, you're separating out your glass. Your glass is separated from your single stream recycling because there's a much better market for that glass, much easier to recycle. Your cardboards and papers and some of your plastics are going into the single stream container. And those are compacted and hauled to Turnkey in Rochester, and they dump it out and they kind of sift through it and they repack it and ship it down to Massachusetts at a single stream recycling processing facility. And the better job we do as residents in having clean recycling, rinsing out all of your plastic containers, and only recycled goods which are eligible in the single stream model, which there's plenty of information out there about, the cheaper our cost is for disposing of those goods. So that said, and it fluctuates. The reason I said it's dynamic is because if we have a bad load, it could cost a fair amount more than what it costs for the MSW in your green trash bags. If we have a good load, maybe not so much. And so that cost fluctuates. The Transfer Station Recycling Center Committee reviews this closely and monitors this data closely. That group is committed to waste diversion programs. That's why you see them and others volunteering with the plastic film recycling. Mr. Fox, we have a new agreement with Mr. Fox for composting, which obviously takes waste diversion from the municipal solid waste in the green bags. But those programs help the overall reduce, reuse, recycle environment. But that is what happens with your recycling. It has cost us more, and I think on average for a year it costs us a little bit more between transportation and tipping fees for recycling, but that does go to facilities, audited facilities for recycling and reintroducing some of those recycled goods into future products.
Any other comments on Article?
Enthusiastic, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Simone Booty, Old Settlers Road. How much does it cost to have Mr. Fox pick up the compost?
Excellent question. That's one that I don't have an answer for you off the top of my head. If a member of the Transfer Station Committee or the Transfer Station Administrator knows off the top of their head, which it looks like Aaron stepping to the microphone to answer that question for you.
Aaron?
Hi, Aaron Paradise. Currently, just because we started with them at the beginning of January, it is $93 a month, and we have weekly pickups. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, Article 24 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 25, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $10,000 to be added to the Fire and Rescue Equipment Capital Reserve Fund previously established. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15, the operating budget article. This article is projected to add 0.5 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $2 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This article is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Capiello.
Thank you. So the purpose of this account is saving for large equipment purchases to avoid budget spikes. So that's sort of that general language. I mean, personally, I think of this as more smaller equipment. We're not talking about the big fire trucks and those kinds of things. We established this in 2012. We have almost $60,000 in it, $59,758, and we're requesting $10,000 contribution that's been supported by both the ABC and the Select Board. Things that we are planning to use this money for in the future would be exhaust vent system, or a new one for the apparatus bays, new cardiac monitors, and a power cot. So as our population has gotten heavier, this is an important thing to save the backs of our staff. So hope you will support this.
Thank you. Any other Select Board comments? ABC comments? Rick comments? No comments from Rick? Okay, anybody else from the floor? Okay, Article 25 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 26. To see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $10,000 to be added to the Communications Upgrades for Emergency Services Capital Reserve Fund previously established. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15. This article is projected to add 0.5 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $2 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This article is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Sakosha.
So this was established in 2005, the warrant article number 17. The current balance of this is $94,625. The request contribution that we're asking for is $10,000. The purpose is for saving, obviously, for communication tower and radio equipment. As we know, the electronic life, newer technology is coming out as fast as we get the technology out there. So the immediate plans for the future use are to replace all portable radios, which those are about 17 years old, police department radio upgrades, and then also, in addition, highway department radio upgrades as well.
Thanks, Jim. Any other comments from the Select Board? ABC, any comments from the floor? Seeing none, Article 26 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 27, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate the sum of $5,000 to be added to the Library Technology Capital Reserve Fund previously established. This is in addition to warrant Article 15. This article is projected to add 0.3 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $1 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This is approved by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Select Person Hardikoff.
This particular capital reserve fund was established 15 years ago. Its current balance is $12,342. Its purpose is to save for library technology improvements, initiatives, and infrastructure needs. There are expectations of upgrades needed for staff workstations and customer workstations over time. And I think this will be just a portion potentially of what is needed for upgrades within the technology.
Thank you. Any other Select Board comments? ABC comments? Any comments from the floor? Okay, seeing none, Article 27 will appear on the ballot as written. Article 28, to see if the town will vote to approve the cost items included in the collective bargaining sidebar agreement reached between the Select Board and the Barrington Police Union and EPBA Local 240, which calls for the following increases in salaries and benefits at the current staffing level. For fiscal year 2025, an estimated increase of $63,565. And further, to raise and appropriate $63,565 for the current fiscal year, such sum representing the additional costs attributable to the increase in salaries and benefits required by the sidebar agreement over those that would be paid at current staffing levels. This appropriation is in addition to warrant Article 15, the operating budget article. This article is projected to add 3.4 cents per $1,000 of assessed value to the 2025 tax rate, or $14 to the tax bill on a $425,000 property. This is recommended by the ABC 5-0 and the Select Board 5-0. Just note, we cannot amend this article because it's a collective bargaining agreement, but we can discuss it. Okay, Select Person Gibson.
Thank you. I was honored to be representing the Select Board as part of these renegotiations. As stated, this will adjust the third year of the 23-26 agreement. It's a requested appropriation of $63,565 and wages in total to increase by 10% for union members. This was unanimously recommended by the ABC and our Select Board. All the data and metrics point to the fact that our police force is significantly understaffed and underpaid. We are fortunate that we can offer a very vibrant community for our officers to work with. It's also widely known across communities that it's a desirable fact to be able to work for the likes of our Chief Joy and Deputy Chief Campbell. These desirabilities of working in Barrington only go so far, and the fact that many of our neighboring communities are paying significantly more for their officers results in the risk of our losing our officers. And the cost of retraining and onboarding a new officer is very significant, and it results in downtime that we don't have adequate staffing. So having these better compensations will lead to better recruitment and retention of our force. Having our compensation be accurate and well aligned with the current rates also help to offset future negotiations that may have more drastic changes and effects on our budget. So trying to stay aligned not only helps us recruit, retain, but helps to negotiate future contracts in a more budgeted fashion.
Thank you. Any other select board comments? Tracy.
Making sure that officers are covered on their responses with fellow officers, that safety issue is something that is extremely near and dear to my heart, and I hope that the town understands that our ability to attract and retain becomes extremely important here on the Seacoast, since our corridors run all the way 125 all the way into Rochester and beyond into Maine and all the way down into Massachusetts. So we're a major travel area, and that includes for both good people and bad people. And so ensuring that our officers have as much response safety as possible becomes very important, and that means having all FTEs filled.
Thank you. Any ABC comments? Any comments from the floor? Comments from Chief Joy?
I'm not going to beat this to death because we beat it to death already from staffing and from presentations about the budget. But I'm going to tell you, Dover is down. Durham is down. Lee is down. Stratford is down. Somersworth is down. Middleton has a police chief. New Durham has a police chief, soon to have one employee. The only agency in Stratford County that I'm aware of that is fully staffed is the town of Farmington, and I can't even believe I'm saying those words. Factually, we've had an opening now for 6 months that I've been unable to fill. We're not attracting the full-time certified officers that we used to. The couple of resumes that we got prior aren't people that I'm going to put my badge onto. I now have a couple of resumes that I'm looking to do a hiring process for. That is directly as a result of pay and hiring in the public safety community right now. We set a contract 2+ years ago. As soon as Barrington set a contract, Rochester got a new contract. Dover got a new contract, which led to Durham getting a new contract. Every time somebody gets a new contract, that standard ratchets up. Currently, and I'm not going to give you the exact figures because I don't have them in front of me, a top step sergeant in the town of Durham under the new contract will be making almost what your chief of police is making. So if they're making almost what I'm making, my sergeants are grossly underpaid as a result of that, which means my patrolmen are grossly underpaid compared to other agencies as well. We're not Durham, we're not Dover, we're not Rochester. We all understand that. But I'm competing for the same people, and I'm competing to keep my people from going to those agencies. Why should my sergeant stay in Barrington and bear the increased liability load of being a supervisor when they can go to the town of Durham, take away that liability of a supervisor, and make more money? So this is really a no-brainer, folks. I know it's a lot to ask. I know we have a contract, but it's very, very important to maintain your individuals that you have hired with us right now and support them. If I have to hire a new cop before I get them on the street, before they're even useful to me in a patrol capacity, it's going to cost you more than $50,000 right off the top. That's me hiring them, getting them to the academy, getting them outfitted. It's a $50,000 outlay before they're even available to me to use on the road. And then they're a brand new cop that doesn't have the experience level of Officer Resnicek, who now has 3 years on, and he's one of my junior guys. So take that for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Any other comments? Seeing none, Article 28 will appear on the ballot as written. That brings us to the zoning articles. And as I said, we can't amend these.
Excuse me, Ron?
Yep.
I would like to make a motion to
restrict
reconsideration on the articles we just voted on.
On all previous articles?
Correct.
Okay.
Second.
Do we have a second?
Dannon.
Dannon, seconds. All right, everybody understands. If we approve this, we can't discuss any of those articles previously discussed. Okay, all those in favor, raise your cards. All those opposed, raise your cards. Okay, all the previous articles are reconsideration restricted. Okay, for these zoning articles, we can discuss them, and I believe our planning board chair, John Driscoll, will talk about these a little bit. We can't amend them, but we can discuss them. So,
John, would it be easier for you to be at the podium with your paperwork? Is that okay, Ron?
Yeah.
You're welcome. It's just easier for you to face the audience that way too. So folks, if you want to follow along, the separate salmon-colored document has all of the warrant article questions and the specific changes to the zoning with the zoning map in the back.
Start with Article 2, Conservation Subdivision. You're going to talk fairly close to that. Okay. Conservation Subdivision Comprehensive Changes, Lot Size Buffering and Review. Ballot question is, are you in favor of Amendment Number 1 to the Barrington Zoning Ordinance as proposed by the Planning Board as follows? To substantially amend Article 6, Conservation Subdivisions, to require a 4-step design review process to strengthen the design criteria and yield plans for a conservation subdivision, to limit groups of units/parcels in the conservation subdivision to 4 units, to amend lot size, setbacks, and require appropriate buffers. The explanation is the existing conservation subdivision regulations do not match the preferred design approaches advocated for the master plan as it relates to preserving Barrington's rural character. The proposed changes to Article 6 may help future developments fit into the community even better by clarifying the design process that developers should use prior to their first meeting with the planning board, expanding the vegetated buffer requirements along existing roadways to 200 feet, increasing the minimum lot size and width, and requiring new design standards within the subdivision. These new standards will require that the homes to be grouped in smaller numbers and that conservation land is retained between these small groups of homes so the future neighborhoods reflect a more rural design. This amendment was recommended by the planning board, approved by the planning board by a vote of 5-0. Are there any questions on this? Please come forward.
Yes, John Wallace, Mary Hill Road. And first, I apologize. I have not done my homework on these. I should have studied up on it in advance. But just some of what I see here, to me, sort of conflicts with my idea of what a conservation subdivision is in terms of trying to preserve natural areas and cluster the housing. Used to be called cluster subdivision. This seems to be more spreading it out, increasing buffers to highways, which makes for a nice green, but it is not really increasing natural areas in any great way. 4 units at a time. I mean, again, this is spreading things out a lot more rather than clustering them to make wide conservation area part of the process. So I'm just a little puzzled by it. Again, I apologize. I should have been at some of the hearings and heard more about it, but that's where I am right now.
Well, speaking about the 200-foot buffer, front buffer, a lot of the comments the board has gotten in the past is that the view from the road shows all these clusters, and it's something that's not very popular and doesn't seem to reflect the desired rural character of the town. when this was brought up with the consultants, that was one of their recommendations, to increase it from 100 feet to 200 feet, to require that it actually be a green belt, that the only intrusion can be for the primary road to enter the subdivision and the underground utility corridor. Nothing else should go in that buffer. There should be no stormwater mitigation measures put in there or anything, so that the view of the subdivision will be severely restricted from the town roads. That seemed to be a big desire requested. In addition to that, as we get to the next amendment, is actually reflected in the conservation subdivisions. The minimum lot size is suggested to be larger. That will require that the yield plans will be smaller, the resulting yield plan, so that in each particular area of certain acreage, for example, a 40-acre lot would go from 21 units down to 13 units, creating more conservation land that can be unified maybe to the rear of the houses or whatever fits the topography as the land. Of course, these are always figures for perfect land. It doesn't take into account wetlands and buffers and so forth.
Here, John, I just want to add to that, if I may.
Sure.
On page 6 of the salmon-colored document, it describes a new process as part of the conservation subdivision called a 4-step design process. And this is a really substantial change to how these projects come before the town. Unfortunately, at times, these conservation subdivision projects are brought to the town fully baked. They are committed to where their lot lines are and where the conservation land is. And I know that you are familiar from your experience with the Conservation Commission. It can be very difficult at times to negotiate with the developers to identify more suitable land to be in the conservation area and otherwise. And so I would encourage you to read through those 4 steps because this would be now a requirement of the development to come in, have a conceptual design review with the planning board before they're committed to a plan, and have input, be presented and have input from the planning board on these 4 steps. Excuse me. The first step being identify primary and secondary conservation areas with the priorities of those items. And so the second point about, although the development would be a little bit more spread out than what the rules allow right now, the idea of maintaining some of that conservation area in between the cluster groups of housing allows more connected areas of conservation space, not only for the homeowners, but also for the wildlife. And so it's certainly a balance. The balance being the town has no ability to stop development in the community, but what we've heard from residents is a desire to make sure that that development balances the existing character in Barrington with our focus and interest in protecting the wetlands and the environment. Thank you.
Matt?
Town, Ayersley. I share some of John's concerns, but so I'll let John stand on its own. Just that I concur with his concern about the 200-foot buffer and pushing the development, the housing, further into what might otherwise be set aside for the wildlife and for recreation. But what brings me up here at the moment is the increase in the lot size up to 130,000 square feet. My question there is that by having fewer housing on what would become a public road, that it becomes more costly to maintain that, and simply because it's less revenue from taxes coming in to maintain that road. And this discussion was actually part of our training and online access with Strong Towns, where they made a case about going up, not out, and having denser communities that also help the communities to become more neighborhoods as opposed to just isolated housing every 1,000 feet or whatever. So my question to you is, has this been considered, and have we taken into account the effect on the tax base by spreading these houses out and still having to maintain this road for 4 houses as opposed to, say, 10 or 15 houses?
I think some of the, if you go back maybe to the early 2000s, there were a lot of meetings with everybody, you know, town meetings. And it was determined at that point was to, for example, make the area in the town, the newly developed town center and the adjacent areas to more intensive development. The result of that is across from the middle school, we ended up with 40 units of housing in rentals. The reaction to that was not very good. A lot of meetings and discussion on the planning board. We changed the zoning so that a similar situation were to arise, we'd only be able to allow 14 units in that area of about less than 20 acres. In addition to that, beyond Irving, 80 units of housing are going in, and the reaction to that has not been very good. It's actually 76 units will be built. We changed the zoning at that point to reflect that, and now only 20 units would be coming in. So the trend had been, people don't want the density. They don't want going, as you suggest, higher numbers. They want things spread out. And I think the thinking was with the 200-foot buffer, if we are going to spread out, maybe at least the illusion that we're not spreading out, having that green belt may help the residents think we're maintaining that rural character, which probably ended many years ago as population has increased so much. So I think that's some of the thinking that's been going on for the last 4 or 5 years when we changed the zoning for the town center and village district. So please.
I can appreciate that you're caught between a rock and a hard place, you know, trying to arrive at a place everybody can agree, which quite frankly doesn't exist. But I would add my voice to those who favor the large open, the conservation subdivision. You know, that concept of clustering houses, small lots, and having more open area is a path, I think, that we could sustain and help Barrington keep that. My concern is that, you know, on the 3-acre minimum, which has been a force, well, I've been in Barrington now 14 years, and it was here when I got here, that the notion of having larger lots so we can keep others out, you know, basically make it financially prohibitive for entry-level housing, for our workplace housing, workforce housing, you know, making those people not settle in Barrington. Well, certainly there's an element of elitism in there, but my concern is we do need these people to be in our town, and we need these people to be able to go to markets and go to the drugstore and have all the sort of infrastructure that most of us either go to Lee or to Rochester now to do. So I would encourage us to, you know, stick with the mantra of up, not out. I know that has been articulated before, and I guess I'd leave it at that. Thank you for your work.
I think if we were just building conventional lots, most of the development seems to be conservation subdivisions, not traditional subdivisions. So one would think ordinarily if you're going to have 200-foot frontage and 3-acre lots, you'd just be knocking woods down to go along a road. But since we're clustering them into smaller areas as conservation subdivisions, I don't think we're running into that problem. But I guess time will tell, you know.
John, could I make a comment?
Sure, please.
So on the select board, we all have to serve on other committees, and I'm ex officio on the planning board. It's actually the next zoning amendment that talks about the 3-acre, you know, going from 1.8 to 3 acres. So that's not part of the 4-step design. It's not part of what the consultant suggests. So that is actually a separate amendment that we're going to be talking about next.
So should I come up then and say the same things?
But I just want everybody to be clear about that. That is actually a separate zoning amendment, one which I actually voted against on the planning board.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Please.
Simone Booty, Old Settlers Road. I wanted to just share a personal experience that we had this year. In January of last year, we were notified that Coot Farm was pending sale, a 550-acre property with 174 homes proposed for that property. If you haven't been down Canaan Back Road, I encourage you to go down there and drive. Right now it's designated as a scenic road, and it's bordered by beautiful stone walls and shagbark hickory trees, and it's really the rural character that we're talking about for Barrington. So over the course of meeting with the planning board, with the developer who was in this agreement with the landowner, the planning board mentioned a lot of requirements that they would need before approval, and the traffic study and the land use study. And we went to 2 planning boards with this buyer, and he dropped out. So now that property has been bought by a company called Lewis Builders out of Atkinson, and they developed a property in Epping. I encourage you to look up Lewis Builders and look at the property that they developed. And it's a cluster home property. So this other outfit had set 174 homes on that 550-acre property that goes up towards Nippo Hill, and they would be like digging out Nippo Hill in order to put it in there behind the mansion that is Coot Farm. So that's what's happening now in Barrington and could be happening, and they haven't proposed anything to the planning board. They're just out surveying for the last 4 months.
Can we keep the conversation to the article? Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
So I'm just saying, I support this article. Please vote for it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Jack Gale, Berry River Road. I'm also a member of the Barrington Conservation Commission, and of course we provide recommendations back to the planning board as some of these things come forward to both groups. Several projects, in general, if you look at our Bill of Rights, you look at what's in there and you can trace it back to our gripes against King George and the Declaration of Independence. I look at this and I see some of the discussions that we have had multiple nights with the Conservation Commission. The driveway access, the setbacks, the things that we thought were part of a conservation subdivision, we thought they should be shalls, and they were vague, and this has led to a process that has frustrated a lot of people along Young Road, and it's scaring people out on Old Canaan. Better defining the process so that both builders can help us develop the community in the way we want it, such that when you look at something, you say, I got a new road, not, oh God, there's a crap load of houses and it's gonna take 20 years to tree in so I don't have to see them. That won't be the case with this. I recommend a better process for conservation subdivisions. The amount of time and angst and redesign. I saw it on the Young Road project, and I can only imagine what could happen on other projects of the same size. Barrington's attractive. We have a chance to make sure it stays that way. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Any more comments, questions? Okay. Let's go to Article 3, which is to amend the zoning, Amendment 2 of the zoning ordinance. Are you in favor of Amendment 2 to this Barrington zoning ordinance as proposed by the Planning Board as follows? Increase the required minimum lot size in the general residential and neighborhood residential zoning districts from 80,000 square feet, 1.84 acres, to 130,000 square feet, 2.98 acres, and increase the required frontage from 200 feet to 250 feet. This amendment would increase the lot size and frontage requirements for subdivisions in general residential and neighborhood residential zoning districts. This change only impacts lots created after March 11, 2025 in the indicated zoning districts. The zoning map, which is part of the packet, shows the general residential and zoning districts in beige and the neighborhood residential zoning districts in green. This was approved by the planning board by a vote of 4-1. Any questions?
John Wallace, Mary Hill Road. Again, I haven't done a lot of homework on this, but I know back when I was more involved in the process as a longtime member of the Conservation Commission, increasing minimum lot size was just a recipe for sprawl. I mean, I grant you this will have a beneficial effect on conservation subdivisions, allowing fewer houses there, more open space, but I just can't see supporting this when many, I don't know if it's a majority, but certainly many of the subdivision plans that come before the planning board, I think, are for single or double, not big conservation subdivisions, and I think it will end up swallowing up a lot more land than needs to happen. That's my take on it up front, and I'd love to hear more about it, though.
Well, when this came up last year, I actually opposed it because of that, one of those reasons, and I think I was convinced by looking at how the development is progressing, and a lot of the developers prefer conservation subdivisions. Utility costs are less, underground utilities, road costs are less, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess I was swayed a bit because of that. Matt?
Well, once again, I would agree with some of John's comments, but I want to ask a hypothetical question in the sense of what happens 10 years, 15 years down the road. Our planning board is completely changed over, and the subdivision rules are open to interpretation, since, as Jack had said, may, not shall. Has there been thought about what happens if we have a new planning board that views those regulations somewhat differently, or the press of adding more housing in the Seacoast, New Hampshire area gets even greater than it already is, which is still pretty substantial? What happens when the philosophy changes and we have to rely upon historical precedent as opposed to what the law actually says? Again, as Jack said, may versus shall.
I can take that one, John, if you want. So to be very clear, the zoning ordinance is the zoning ordinance of the community, period. So this is the community, the registered voters in the community, opportunity to establish what they want for land use rules in their community. And in any one year, the community can vote to completely change those. And so it isn't necessarily the fact that in 10 years there might be a different planning board, but there may be a different will of the people in 10 years, and they can change their rules. To the point that the planning board has a subjective role, the planning board's role in reviewing applications is much more objective than subjective. They are reviewing the proposed development in evaluating if it meets the existing regulations in the zoning ordinance or the applicable subdivision or site review regulations that the planning board establishes. And so that the idea that the planning board serves in a largely subjective role where they, the changing makeup of the planning board has a big impact on the developments that happen if the zoning ordinance stays the same is unlikely, is extremely unlikely. And so it's much more possible, to your concern, that the will of the people changes. In 50 years from now, the kind of infill development that you see in other parts, other more urban parts of the country could absolutely happen in Barrington. But importantly, it is the people of Barrington, the residents of Barrington, that they're the only ones that can establish and amend their zoning ordinance. And so it's entirely possible that any number of the provisions of the zoning ordinance could be changed next year or in 10 years.
Thank you.
If the population changes, I'm good with that. Particularly since if it happens 15 years from now, it's unlikely I'll be dealing with it. So thank you for that. Okay. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. The Office of Planning and Development suggests that the New Hampshire population will peak around 2042 to 2045. As the baby boomers, I think over a 5-year period, 120,000 of us will die and only 60,000 people will be born. There may be a massive number of climate refugees moving up here from the south. Who knows what will happen? But right now, if we look at everything that's open, approved developments and ones probably that will be approved, we probably have 220 to 240 houses already, dwelling units already in the pipeline. But the developers keep showing up, as Booty made clear that the Lewis developer may come forward with a plan. We haven't seen anything yet, but just an aside. Any more questions on Article 3 to amend Amendment number 2? Okay, let's see, we go. Article 4. Multi-family housing, decrease the number of units allowed per building. Are you in favor of Amendment 3 of the Barrington zoning ordinance as proposed by the planning board as follows? Amend the table of uses to limit multi-family housing building in the general residential district and neighborhood residential village and highway commercial overlay district to 4 units per building, except in projects designated as workforce housing where multi-family units can have 5 units per building. That's to conform with state policy. This amendment proposes to decrease the number of units allowed in multifamily units from 8 to 4 in most zoning districts. This amendment would apply to the town center regional commercial, would not apply to the town center regional commercial districts, which is 125 and Route 4. The zoning map shown in the town center zoning district in purple and the regional commercial overlay district in orange. The other districts would still allow 8 units per building. Workforce housing projects, as mentioned, would allow 5 units. The amendment was recommended to the planning board in a 5-0 vote. Any questions on this one? Hearing none, we'll go to 5. Article 5, zoning. Are you in favor of amending amendment number 4 to the Barrington zoning ordinance proposed by the planning board? Amend Article 11 to clarify the district's restriction on septic systems and the exemption from those restrictions. The purpose of the existing shoreline protection district is to preserve the overall quality of surface waters and the adjacent environment in Barrington. This amendment would impose additional septic system requirements if living spaces expanded by more than 100 square feet. This reflects any changes took place in September 1st, 2024 as a result of House Bill 1113, which also expanded coverage for septics to 250 feet from the lake. And effectively a concern with septic systems older than 20 years old. Before a house could be transferred, it would require inspections by a certified septic inspector, indicating that the system is functioning properly. If not, it would have to be, I guess, repaired within 90 days. This also was approved by the by 5-0 by the planning board. Any questions about this one?
I'll just add to what John explained. We have a lot of water resources in the community, and the folks that live around those lakes and ponds are very concerned with the lake health. The town doesn't have a lot of control in areas that affect the lake health. This is an area in the zoning ordinance with the Shoreline Protection District, which allows the planning board to enforce separate rules in that district than elsewhere in town. And so a lot of the data supports that lake health is largely affected by the subsurface wastewater treatment facilities on people's property. And this amendment strengthening the requirements of when new designs or new systems are in place, the hope is that it will help to further protect the water quality in those lakes and ponds. The town doesn't have a lot of control, but this is an area where the residents of the community can enforce stricter requirements, and so that's why this is being proposed before the voters.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Also, as a land use, innovative land use control requirement, towns can put more strict restrictions in. A couple of towns around Winnipesaukee have required that the anything within 250 feet have to be pumped every 3 years, for example. So that's something maybe the Lakes Association in Barrington can look at. Good, Matt.
Just to add my voice to that, I strongly support this type of regulation, particularly on the lakes. Having been a resident with shoreline protection, you built a house to the stricter standards before the rules changed and became looser. We built a house to the stricter standards voluntarily. So I'm delighted to see this on the ballot now so that that same stricter standard can be adhered to.
Thank you. Next, Article 6, nursing facilities not allowed in residential zones. Ballot question, are you in favor of Amendment number 5 to the Barrington zoning ordinance as proposed by the Planning Board as follows? Amend the table of uses to remove nursing facilities as a use permitted by conditional use permit in the general residential and neighborhood residential districts and to allow it by special exception instead of conditional use permit in the highway commercial overlay district, which are the other highways within 750 feet from the center line of the road, like on 126 and 202. Any questions? This was also.
John Wallace had a question.
Oh, sure, come back, please.
Maybe you're about to say. What prompted this? It seems out of the blue to me. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think people were concerned that in the general residential, neighborhood residential districts, if you look at the definition of the general they hope that development will be probably single-family homes on particular lots that are many that go back many years. So the small, I'm on a 1 acre lot, for example, and that maybe a facility such as this does not really fit into those districts. They are allowed pretty much every place else in town. So I think that's the reasoning.
And just to build on that, the planning board being the primary group that recommends zoning amendments to the residents of the community have a responsibility to be equally proactive and reactive, right? You heard the planning board chair talk about some projects the planning board saw and recommended changes to the zoning ordinance after that because the implementation of the ordinance was different than they anticipated. It's equally important for the planning board to be proactive and think of what development might come to Barrington. The zoning ordinance relating to nursing and nursing type facilities is an ordinance that changed in 2024. So for folks that pay attention, you might remember that there was a proposal to have an assisted living type facility on the Barrington Common property. And that would have been a substantial development with some separate residential units. And they needed a variance because our regulations didn't specify that specific type of development. And so reactively, the planning board in 2024 proposed specific zoning ordinance provisions for nursing and assisted living type facilities, making clear what the requirements would be in order to build that type of facility, maybe so the next one that comes and tries to develop in Barrington doesn't need a separate relief because there's actually a provision for it. And so it isn't uncommon when you establish or expand an ordinance to realize, oh, hey, maybe there might be some unintended consequences of doing it this way. Let's make sure that these types of facilities don't end up in residential zones. And so, like I said, the headline being the planning board needs to be reactive and proactive. This is a proactive attempt to make sure that we don't end up with development that residents wouldn't want to see.
Yeah, recently Riverwoods tried to expand their facility in the middle of a residential neighborhood in Exeter, and there was a big reaction to it. I think the thinking there was these probably would be better suited in a highway district or similar district. Please come forward.
Thank you. Simone, Old Settlers Road. I just wanted to say quickly that we have a scanner in our house, and if you listen to the traffic out of Durham for Harmony Homes and the other big nursing type facility they have, at least once a day I hear a call of an ambulance going there. And in Barrington, at current staffing levels, we don't have the ability to send an ambulance there. So it would really impact the tax rate down the line for our emergency services.
Thank you. Brings us to Article 7, recreational vehicles, limit occupancy to 180 days per year. Are you in favor of amendment number 6 to the Barrington zoning ordinance as proposed by the planning board as follows? Amend the table of uses to remove footnote 14 prohibiting the use of recreational vehicles as a primary use of a property, and amend Article 3.31 to allow recreational vehicles to be occupied as either a primary or accessory use of a property for up to 180 days per year. This was supported by the planning board by a vote of 5-0. Currently, the use of recreational vehicles in Barrington is regulated by footnote 14 of the table of uses. This amendment would provide a more complete definition of the use of a recreational vehicle. Further, this amendment would make clear that recreational vehicles may only be occupied for up to 180 days per year when proper sewage disposal, property line setbacks, and dressing and other conditions are met. Is there any comment on this? Hearing none, we'll go to number 8. Maximum building size, village and town center districts, 50,000 square feet. Are you in favor of amendment number 7 to the Barrington zoning ordinance as proposed by the planning board as follows? Amend Article 4.2.2 parentheses 5 to remove the ability to exceed 50,000 square feet, a maximum non-residential building in the village district through the issuance of a conditional use permit, and decrease the maximum non-residential building size of a building that are part of a planned unit development that are permitted by conditional use permit in the town center zoning district from 70,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet. This amendment limits the non-residential building in the town center and village zoning districts to 50,000 feet. An applicant can only exceed the maximum through application to the to the zoning board of adjustment. The zoning map also shows the village zoning district in yellow and the town center district in purple. This was also supported by the planning board at a vote of 5-0. Any comments, questions? Hearing none, we'll go to Article 9. Poorly and very poorly drained soil definitions and associated updates. Typically, when we would discuss, historically, probably since the 80s, when they were discussing poorly drained, very poorly drained areas, they used the term hydric A soils and hydric B soils. That's become out of fashion. So our language has changed to reflect that. So are you in favor of amendment number 8 to the zoning ordinance as proposed by the planning board as follows? Amend Article 8, which is our definitions, to delete the definitions of hydric A soils and hydric B soils and insert instead definitions of poorly drained soils and very poorly drained soils from the site-specific soil standards for New Hampshire and Vermont as amended as published by the Department of Agriculture. Further amend Article 9.3.1 regarding the edge of primary wetlands to replace reference to hydric A soils with very poorly drained soils. This amendment updates the outdated definitions of specific soils standards. Currently, the definition references hydric A and hydric B soils. The proposal is to specify the soil conditions as a result in poorly drained and very poorly drained soils. This amendment also updates the prime wetland designation to reference the new terms instead of hydric A soils. This was approved by the planning board by a vote of 5-0. Any questions? Hearing none, go to Article 10, zoning definition updates, steep slopes, abutter. Are you in favor of amendment number 9 to the Barrington zoning ordinance as proposed by the planning board as follows? Amend Article 18, definitions to add a definition of steep slopes as a hillside with a grade of 15% or greater, and very steep slopes of hillside with a grade of 25% or more, and amend the definition of a butter to coincide with the statutory definition, which was amended by legislature in 2024 to define the term directly across the street or stream. This was approved by the planning board with a vote of 5-0. Any questions? Just get my pages together here. Article 11. Zoning. By petition, special use permits not to be used to establish a prohibited use. Are you in favor of amendment number 10 to the Barrington zoning ordinance by petition as follows, to add the bold text below to the zoning ordinance in Article 9 of Article 9.6 special use permit? A special use permit shall not establish a use specifically prohibited by the ordinance. This amendment was not recommended by the planning board by a vote of 4-1. The majority feels the purpose of a special use permit as defined by the ordinance is to consider a use not otherwise permitted in the wetland buffer. The minority feels that the zoning board of adjustment should consider such requests. Again, it was not recommended by a vote of 4-1. Any questions or comments? Please come back forward, Steve.
Stephen Jeffrey, 128 France Road. I submitted all 4 of these petitioned amendments. The text that I suggested, I sourced from Fremont, New Hampshire, right out of their similar provision. Our zoning ordinance 9.6 says a use not otherwise permitted in the wetland buffer may be undertaken if the planning board approves an applicant's request for a special use permit. And a use not otherwise permitted does not include a prohibited use. And we prohibit buildings, we prohibit dredge and fill in the wetland buffer. The New Hampshire Municipal Association has opined an SUP can't be used for prohibited use. And what's happening is the zoning ordinances, or the planning board is actually changing the zoning ordinance to allow prohibited uses. I can't accept that. The other thing that's happening is individual lot owners are coming to the planning board and requesting or submitting an application they want to build or whatever in the wetlands buffer. And the planning board has been issuing them a 9.6 permit. The planning board has no statutory authority to provide zoning ordinance relief to individual lot owners when there's no subdivision or site plan pending. This is straight from the New Hampshire OEP. I can find no statute that allows them to do that. And there's been at least one court case telling the town that the planning board cannot act on an individual lot. So I think what's, like I said, the planning board is changing the ordinance, and I have real difficulty accepting that. Only the legislature, us, can change it.
Thank you. Any further questions? Hearing none. Article 12, zoning by petition, lot frontage, access shall not be by right of way. Are you in favor of amendment number 11 to the Barrington zoning ordinance by petition as follows, to insert in bold text, the bold text below to the zoning ordinance, Article 4.1.2, lot frontage, and Article 18, definitions of lot frontage. Access to the lot shall not be by right of way across another owner's property. This amendment was not recommended for approval by the planning board by a vote of 3-2. The majority feel that this additional language is not necessary because of existing state law and the implications for enforcement on private roads, which are often rights of way over property of another. The minority feels that the proposed language can be enforced consistent with existing state law. Steve?
Yep, I proposed this language. And RSA 674-41 says access to a lot means a street abutting the lot upon which the lot has frontage. It does not include a street from which the sole access to the lot is via a private easement or right-of-way. In February 24, the town received a decision from the New Hampshire Supreme Court in Harvey v. Barrington that part of their text reads, the statute lists several types of streets that can satisfy the access requirement, including private roads. Here, the access is proposed via the private easement over the front lot. The state requires that lots have ownership of land to and abutting a public road. A right-of-way over another butter's land does not provide ownership of the land or satisfy state law. Now, it doesn't matter if you call it a private road. It has to do with how is it actually created, and who owns the land underneath that road. And we get a lot of right-of-ways, and the town calls them private roads for purposes of either 911 or whatever, just to label them. But that doesn't make them a public road or the equivalent of a public road. A lot of these right-of-ways, you could never accept those as a public road. And if you start doing that, our town budget's going to escalate quite a bit.
Thank you. Article 13, zoning by petition, definition street does not include a right-of-way. Are you in favor of amendment number 12 to the Barrington zoning ordinance by petition as follows? To add the bold text below, pardon me, to the zoning ordinance, Article 18, definition street. That is, a street shall not include a right-of-way over another owner's property. This amendment is recommended for approval by the planning board by a vote of 3-2. The majority feel that the proposed language can be enforced consistent with existing state law. The minority feels that this additional language is not necessary because of existing state law, and the interpretation and the implications for enforcement on private roads, which are often rights of way over property of another. Please.
This is the same reasoning, basically, as the prior amendment. And it's also consistent with our subdivision regulations, which says no subdivision shall be approved unless the property to be subdivided shall have frontage on and access from an existing Class 5 or better road. Each lot shall have a safe, independent, and direct access from a Class 5 or better road. Do I need to explain this anymore?
Thank you. Article 14, zoning by petition, definition, lot of record is an unimproved lot. Are you in favor of amendment number 13 to the Barrington zoning ordinance by petition as follows? To insert the bold text below to the zoning ordinance, Article 18 definitions, lot of record to be an unimproved lot that is part of A. This amendment was not recommended by the planning board by a vote of 5-0. They feel that the proposed language creates unnecessary confusion regarding the vesting of a lot for certain land use rules. If approved, this amendment would remove the vesting of a property if a dwelling was not built on the lot. Practically all legally existing lots are lots of record, whether they are improved or not. Steve?
Yeah, I'm addressing this issue. What I've seen over time is the planning board has assigned a lot of record status to existing improved but non-conforming lots, and then use that status to exempt any proposed improvements to the property from compliance with the zoning ordinance. Now, if we take every lot in town as a lot of record, and then we grant them an exception from the zoning ordinance, what are we left with? You know, state law and our zoning ordinance says the more restrictive provision applies. So if you've got a non-conforming small lot, say on the waterfront with a house on it, people come in, they want to demolish the house and build a bigger house. Our ordinance says that they cannot increase the non-conformity of that lot. Yet what I see happening is the planning board just says, oh, well, it's a lot of record, they can do whatever they want. You know, this is insane what's going on. And you want to protect water quality, look at all the big new houses they're building on these old camps, you know.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any comments? You're all set? Thank you very much.
Does Select Board have any comments on the zoning articles? No? Good. Okay. Article 29, to transact any other business that may legally come before said meeting of the honorable town government. We can't do anything binding here, but you can discuss pretty much anything you want. I just want to remind people that next Saturday, same location, is the school district's deliberative session. A much shorter warrant, much bigger dollars. So you might want to show up and participate there. Anybody have anything to talk about? I'd just like to ask Suzanne, do you have a count of how many voters are here today?
60.
60? And how many people on the checklist?
7,200.
7,200. Okay. Okay, that's a small percentage. But anyway, all right. Anybody else have any comments they'd like to make? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion to end the deliberative session. John Wallace made that motion. A second? John Driscoll. All those in favor, raise your cards. All those opposed? Not very many. Okay. Thank you for coming. The meeting is ended.
Mike will put it up on the screens, but you'll want to be here on Tuesday, March 11th. There's 4 stickers designed by kids in Barrington. If Mike can put up the PowerPoint slide on the screens. And if you vote, you'll be able to get one of those stickers. So make sure you show them vote March 11th.
What was it? Great. The whole meeting? Your last deliberative session. I know.
So we don't need.
I'm actually sad about it.